Mr. Thomas, the meeting has started recording.
All right, thank you. Folks, thanks everybody for coming. And again, I've just got a script, some words I want to share with everyone, talking about the technology here and what we're here for. But we are now on the record in docket number CC-2020-OGR-01-001. This is the time set for the spacing hearing in the matter of the application of Snake River Oil and Gas LLC for the spacing order consisting of the east half of the southeast quarter of section 9, the southwest quarter of section 10, the north half of the northwest quarter of section 15, and the north half of the northeast quarter of section 16, Township 8 North, Range 5 West, Boise Meridian, Payette County, Idaho. The time is now 9:25 Mountain Time. My name is Mick Thomas. I'm the hearing officer here, and I'm also the division administrator over minerals, public trust, oil and gas with the Idaho Department of Lands. The hearing officer has the authority to preside over the hearing, accept evidence into the record, and rule on objections to evidence. Evidence should be taken to assist the party's development of the record, but not to frustrate this development. I may exclude testimony that is irrelevant, unduly repetitious, inadmissible on constitutional or statutory grounds, or on the basis of any evidentiary privilege in law or recognized in court. All other evidence may be admitted if it is of a type that is commonly relied on by prudent persons in the conduct of their affairs. I will also provide time for recesses, as needed. I will say this is being recorded. This will be posted on our site. The entire recording, video and audio, is recorded via Zoom. I anticipate recesses between parties or more often. If it looks like it's going to be a 2-hour discussion, I may break it up. I want everyone to be able to have that time to discuss with their counsel what they want to discuss and to take other breaks as needed. As many of you know, the COVID-19 response has changed many of the typical aspects of a hearing of this type. Normally, we'd all be in a room together. This hearing is virtual via Zoom, as authorized by IDAPA 0411011552, and again is being recorded in Zoom as required by IDAPA 0411011651. We also have a backup recording device of the hearing, which is my phone. Folks, I would ask that you please mute your microphones until you're called on. Please speak loudly and clearly when it is your turn. If there's a disturbance, you will be reminded to mute your microphone. If the disturbance continues, you may be muted and/or disconnected. To give a little explanation, sometimes folks have their phone unmuted, and in the background you hear conversations and dogs and dishes and all kinds of stuff. That's disruptive to the hearing. And when that happens, we'll ask you to mute your phone. And if it doesn't happen, if you don't turn it off and it continues, we'll have to disconnect you. I don't, based on the parties we have here, I don't think that'll be a problem. I just want everybody to know. And for those of you following this remotely, the material in this meeting is broadcast via Facebook Live. Please visit our website at the ogcc.idaho.gov site and click on the Watch Hearing on Facebook Live link. We are here to receive evidence and testimony regarding Snake River's application for a spacing order establishing a 300-acre spacing unit. The existing Fallon 110 well is located in this proposed unit. The spacing request is made under Idaho Code 47-318. Therefore, generally the goal of this hearing is to determine the size, shape, and location of the unit, if the size, shape, and location of the unit is appropriate to the size and location of the pool. Because this is an evidentiary hearing on a spacing application, I will not consider evidence related to the integration or just in reasonable terms under Idaho Code 47-320. I said this in the pre-hearing order. I think everyone has a good understanding of this. But this is just to focus on the size, shape, and location of the unit in relation to the size and location of the pool. During this evidentiary hearing, the parties will have the opportunity to present evidence. Public witnesses will have the opportunity to present public testimony with rights and status as defined by DAPA 04-11-01-355. A public witness testimony period will begin tonight at 6 p.m., August 13th, at the Fruitland City Hall, 200 South Whitley Drive, Fruitland, Idaho, as well as via Zoom, where public witnesses who signed up by the deadline as per the pre-hearing order will have the opportunity to present public testimony with rights and status as defined by DAPA, again, 04-11-01-355. I want to thank the City of Fruitland for providing this venue. We appreciate it. Parties and agency staff have submitted evidence that is posted on the OGC website. We will be using the documents posted on the website to ensure that we are all on the same page. Please reference the page number by the PDF page number. The evidence will be displayed by our Chris Gozo, a member of the administrator's staff, me. Parties and witnesses should direct Mr. Gozo to each specific exhibit as needed and page they would like displayed at the time they would like it displayed. I will say Chris is very good at this, and I've seen him in some of the other hearings. You should have no problem communicating with him. Documents in this record are in docket number CC-2020-OGR-01-002 or on the 01 or the OGCC website. As a reminder, at the pre-hearing conference in the pre-hearing order, I took official notice of docket number CC-2016-OGR-01-004 and docket number CC-2019-OGR-01-002 pursuant to IDAPA 04-11-01-601. Well, that was a tongue twister. Thank you, folks. That said, I have an order of people that I'm going to go through. We're going to start with the applicant. Then we'll go on to Mr. Piotrowski and his clients, and then to the City of Fruitland, and then to Ms. Vega, representing the IDL, and then up unrepresented parties who have received notice of this hearing. So, will Snake River's representative please identify themselves for the record?
Michael Christian here for the applicant, Snake River, Mr. Administrator, and my witness, James Allen, is here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. Mr. Piotrowski, can you please identify yourself and who you represent?
James Piotrowski here representing IA and a group of mineral interests both within and outside the proposed spacing unit.
Thank you, Mr. Piotrowski. A few more questions. Can you identify the Kaya members that are within the proposed spacing unit?
Yeah, give me a moment.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, that's the wrong document. Let me find the right document.
That's okay.
So I'm representing within the proposed spacing unit, I believe includes Judith and Jimmy Hicks, Karen Altman, Alan and Glenda Grace, Shady River LLC. Outside the proposed spacing unit, but we believe within a possible appropriate spacing unit, are Carrie Grant, Shannon Benedict, Dawn and Phyllis Gruel, Sharon Simmons, Lowell and Geraldine Davis, James and Beverly Smith, and Dana Harris. Kaya appears in a representative capacity on behalf of its members.
Thank you, Mr. Piotrowski. Just a few administrative housekeeping questions here. What evidence have you provided into the record of what you just said? Any affidavits, or will this just be testimony?
We have not submitted any evidence for the record, and don't presently plan to.
Okay, thank you very much. Just want to go through my list real quick. It looks like you've answered the other questions. All right. Thank you, Mr. Piotrowski. Will the City of Fruitland Council please identify yourself and who you represented?
Yes, sir. This is Stephanie Bonney with MSBT Law. I represent the City of Fruitland, and I'm attending with the Mayor of the City of Fruitland.
Thank you, Ms. Bonney. Ms. Vega, can you please identify yourself for the record and who you represent?
Good morning, Joy Vega, Deputy Attorney General, appearing on behalf of the Idaho Department of Lands. With me today is James Thumb.
Thank you, Ms. Vega. And it behooves me to ask, let me screenshot here. Okay. I don't see any other ones, but are there any unrepresented parties who have received notice of this hearing who are on this call? All right, no response. Thank you very much. Let me just go over my notes real quickly. Okay, folks, with that, I'm going to allow the applicant to present first. Snake River Oil and Gas LLC, you may make an opening statement, followed by Mr. Piotrowski, and then Ms. Bonney, and then Ms. Vega. I would say each party is limited to 6 minutes for their opening statement. And with that, Snake River will start the testimony. Go forward.
Mr. Administrator, thank you. I don't intend to offer an extensive opening statement. Mr. Allen's testimony and his declaration and supplemental declaration that are already in the record will serve to support the application. But very briefly, we intend to offer evidence that establishes that the proposed 300-acre unit area is the configuration that is most appropriate to efficiently and economically develop the pool, and is not smaller than the maximum area drainable by one well.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. Mr. Piotrowski, would you like to initiate an opening statement?
Rights owners believe that the current application is not based and will not serve the statutory requirement of economic and efficient development of the whole. Instead, the current application is focused solely on applicants' own interests, is focused solely on making a profit from a well that was previously drilled and is not consistent with the statutory requirement of the Idaho Oil and Gas Conservation Act. Instead, spacing unit should be set to encompass the entire known pool of hydrocarbons that could be efficiently and economically developed, not simply that pool that is most accessible to Snake River's well. This is the application is not consistent with the statutory content.
Thank you, Mr. Piotrowski. Ms. Bonney, would you like to provide an opening statement on behalf of the city?
No, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Bonney. Ms. Vega, would you like to present an opening statement, please?
No, we have no opening statement this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that went quickly. I appreciate everyone's engagement on that. Starting off right now, Snake River, you're welcome to start the testimony, and you may call your first witness.
Thank you, sir. We'll call James Allen.
Okay, thank
Hello.
you. I will offer the oath to these witnesses. Mr. Allen, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can.
Okay. Thank you. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I swear so.
Okay, Mr. Allen, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I'm gonna walk Mr. Allen through some questions.
Thank you. I meant that, Mr. Christian. Thank you. You may.
Thank you, thank you. Jim, can you state your full name and spell your last name for the record, please?
My name is James Lynn Allen. The last name is A-L-L-E-N.
And where are you located?
I'm in Houston, Texas.
Okay, can you please briefly describe your educational and professional background?
Yes, I got a bachelor's degree in physics from Baker University and a PhD in physics from the University of Wyoming. I was hired from there by Exxon, where I started my career in Houston. I worked for another company, then went on my own in 1980 as a consultant. I've managed several small companies since then. I've been a geophysicist for 46 years in the oil industry.
Can you just briefly explain what it is you do as a geophysicist?
I take geophysical data, primarily seismic data, marry it to the geology and try to determine potential hydrocarbon traps, and if we find one, to try to understand the reservoir that's been discovered. And
are you familiar with the application for a spacing order that we're discussing here today, correct?
Yes.
You've been involved in the process of determining for the applicant what is the most appropriate spacing area?
Yes, I have.
Can you give another brief description of the process that you go through in determining the likely drainage area of a well and appropriate spacing?
What we look at is, first of all, the well log, the amount of pay, the configuration of the reservoir, and look at how that relates to the seismic data to find the limits of the reservoir in every direction. And then, using that information, we can determine what would be the best unit size. And
I want to interrupt, and I apologize, Mr. Christian, Mr. Allen. We've lost the Facebook live stream, apparently. It is what it is. If everyone doesn't mind, and I really apologize for interrupting midstream like that, but let's take about a 5 to 6 minute recess. Let's say 5 minutes, 5-minute recess. We'll come back at, let's say, 9:48 Mountain Standard Time and see if we can be broadcasting live on Facebook. And again, folks, I really apologize for this, but I just want to make sure the information is out there. I hope everybody can understand. So I'm just going to mute and see if we can get this fixed. I'll step away for a moment and then come back. All right. So my apologies, folks. Hang in there. Chris, please. And I'm going to hand it back over to Mr. Christian and Mr. Allen. And again, I apologize for this. I really do appreciate your understanding and flexibility here. Please continue with your discussion, testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Jim, do we have you on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I apologize. My short-term memory is terrible. I think we were in the middle of answering the question about the factors that you take into account in the process you go through in determining the likely drainage area of a well and the appropriate spacing area as a consequence. So if you could, you could repeat that answer and finish it for me.
Sure. Basically, what we do is take the geologic information from the well, tie it to the seismic data, and from that information determine the extent of the producible reservoir. Then we draw the unit appropriately in accordance with the law.
And as a short follow-up, in some instances, you would you also take into account data that's generated from the testing or flowing of the well?
All of the information from the well that has been acquired. Testing information, geologic information, everything.
And generally speaking, what kinds of information would you generate in well testing?
The most important things are the pressure, the porosity of the and permeability of the reservoir, the type of whether there's water in the reservoir, water support to the reservoir, all of that information, how the pressure behaves in a test, etc.
Okay. Is Mr. Gozo handling exhibits? Yes. Okay, Mr. Gozo, if you could bring up exhibit SR1 to start.
Okay, one moment. I'll go ahead and pull that up.
Thank you.
Mr. Christian, as a reminder, please identify the exhibit when it comes up with the
Yes.
exhibit number. Thank you.
Mr. Gozo, if you can scroll down, or yeah, you're probably going to have to scroll.
Sure, not a problem. Mr. Christian, do you have a page number?
You should reach it on the 4th page. There we go. Mr. Allen, can you see that on your screen?
Yes.
Okay, so we've been, what's being presented is exhibit SR1. Did you prepare that exhibit?
Yes, I did.
Okay, can you please explain what it depicts?
What this map is the depth to the top of the B sand, which is the productive sand in the Fallon well. The contours represents the depth contour interval is 50 feet and are marked as negative numbers, which means the depth from sea level. The different colors on the map, well, first of all, at the wellbore itself, you can see the top of the B sand is 1289 subsea, and that ties into the data, the seismic data. The rest of the map away from the well is based on the seismic data. We can map the top of the B sand easily. To the northeast and the northwest, you will see some long colored lines. Those are the faults that limit the reservoir to the north and the southwest. Drawn with a red dotted line is the gas water contact in the well and how it relates to the structure map. The sand itself goes way off to the northwest, as can be seen, and gets deeper as it goes to the northwest. It climbs to the southeast. That's what the map is showing. The reservoir, however, is limited by the type of, the productive limit is limited by the type of reservoir, which is water drive, we think.
I want to ask a couple follow-up questions just for clarity. So the numbers that are indicated on the contour lines are also depths below sea level, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So that to the northwest, there's a contour line labeled minus 1700, and to the southeast, there's a contour labeled 1200, right?
Right.
So
right.
with that, so is that the indicator that the structure dips down to the northwest and climbs to the southeast?
That's correct.
Okay. And go ahead.
Also, the blue dashed outline is the proposed unit.
Yes. Okay. So you described the red dotted line that's generally oriented to the northwest as the gas water contact. Can you explain what you mean by that?
In the wellbore, the sand is fairly thick and has gas on top of water. As you know, the gas floats on the water, and that's line identifies the level at which the gas lies on top of water in the reservoir.
And what's the relevance? What's the relevance of a gas water contact?
Well, that means there's no more gas deeper than that point in the entire reservoir. There are sandstone.
And we'll get to this in later exhibits, but is it true that these the gas water contact, for example, is something that you could identify in either or both of the seismic or the well logs from the drilling of the well?
It is certainly in the well log, and in this case, we can see it seismically. It's
Okay.
not always the case in reservoirs, but in here we can.
Okay. Now, there's an indication for that dotted line that says G/W minus 1381.
That is the gas water contact, which
Okay.
is at a subsea depth of 1,381 feet.
Okay, so at least in gross terms, Mr. Piotrowski is receiving reports that the Facebook feed is down again. Mr. Administrator, do you have any information on that account?
I'm monitoring it as well, Mr. Christian, and it is live right now. There's the same delay that we encountered earlier. It may be a 20 or 30 second, but the Facebook Live page is broadcasting. We have 7 people streaming it. Mr. Gozo, can you provide any sort of backup confirmation of that?
Mr. Thomas, I am able to see the Facebook live stream as well right now.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And Mr. Christian, thank you very much for pointing that out. Again, it's not within your role of responsibility to do that, but I clearly invite your eagerness to help on that. So thank you. Please proceed.
Well, Mr. Piotrowski gets the credit because he pointed it out in a chat message, but
Fair enough.
I just want to make sure that we're doing everything that we should be doing.
Yeah,
I'll continue.
no,
I'll continue.
thank you.
Mr. Allen, a few other questions just to flesh out this exhibit. There's a sort of star-shaped symbol a little south of the center of the proposed unit area. Is that the existing bottom of the well?
Yes, that's the total depth. That's the position of the well, and the number below it, 5432, is the measured depth to the bottom of the well.
And that number is not subsurface; it's a measured depth from the top of the wellbore to the bottom of the wellbore, right?
That's right.
Essentially.
It actually starts at the not at the surface, but at the Kelly bushing, which
Right.
is about 12 feet above the surface.
Right.
From there
So
down to the, and it's the measured depth along the wellbore. It's not a true depth, vertical depth. It's a measured depth.
And that brings up the next question, which is there's a line that goes from that bottom hole location to the northeast. Does that depict the how the wellbore lays viewed from above?
That is right.
And it's an indicator that the well is not a vertical well, but was directionally drilled, correct? Is that right?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. So going back to the numbers that we discussed before, we have an indication of the B sand top at minus 1289 and the gas water contact at minus 1381. Does that generally, the difference between those two generally describe the thickness of the productive sand?
In general, if we look at, if you'd like to look at Exhibit 5, I think we can explain this a little clearer, perhaps.
Okay, let me just ask a couple more questions, and then we're going to go to
Sure.
Exhibit 5. So the smaller dotted line to the southeast, can you explain what that depicts?
Yes, this is the limit of what we think this well can produce. And it is where the bottom of the B sand intersects the top of where the perforations in the Fallon number 110 would be. There are some good illustrations later in here, and the IDL has an excellent exhibit illustrating what I mean on that, if you'd like to look at that.
We may get to that, but the basic point I want to get to is that the well bore intersects the top of sand B at minus 1289 sub C, correct?
Right.
So if you were to attempt to perforate the well above that, you would no longer be in the sand in the well bore, right?
That's right. It would be, you would be in non-productive zones above the sand.
Okay. Well, let's go, Mr. Gozo, if we can go to Exhibit SR5. Which I'm going to say is about page 8. There you go. Mr. Allen, you said you could give further explanation with reference to this exhibit.
Right.
First of all, can you identify what Exhibit SR5 is?
This exhibit is a log from the wellbore. It's called a Neutron Density Log. On the left are the curves that indicate the presence of sand. The ones in the center indicate the resistivity of the rocks in the wellbore. And on the right, the two curves are porosity curves that the ones that overlap and are colored.
And
what we have,
go ahead.
What you see, what is marked sand B is the top of the productive sand. The zones colored in red are zones that we've identified as being productive based on the log properties in this well. Below where we have what's marked as probable gas water contact is where below that line is definitely water, and above that line is productive. And the depths that you see are the top of the sand B, for example, where it says measured MD is measured depth of 3272. If you correct that for the deviation of the well, the true vertical depth is 3453, and that works out to be minus 1289 feet sub C. Similarly, you do the calculations below. The gross overall interval of this sand is about 162 feet measured. The correcting for the wellbore, the actual true vertical thickness, gross thickness is 141 feet.
And
we cannot, there is no, the point about the gas water contact is there's no hydrocarbons below that point. And so that's the limit of the reservoirs. Once you've identified that, that's it. There's no more hydrocarbons.
Can you just explain briefly how you determine through the well log that there is only water below the gas water contact and not hydrocarbons?
It's based on the resistivities. Now this water here is quite fresh, so the resistivities of the water, which are the curve just to the right to the center, are rather high, but they're still lower than the known zones above it, which are colored red. The distinctions are subtle on this log, but we have experience with all of the logs and production at the Willow Field to tell us where the demarcation line is.
While we're on this exhibit, can you explain the significance on the left-hand side? There have spaces that are colored yellow and then spaces that are white or blank. Can you explain the distinction between those? Yes, the ones that are colored yellow are sands, as defined by the well logs, and in between there are white spaces. These are zones that are not sands. They're clay stones, shales, non-productive zones. So although we have a gross interval of pay, that's not the net pay. We have to take out those small, thin layers that are not productive to calculate the actual pay thickness. And we're going to get to this in another exhibit, but that you would go through that process, for the purposes of creating a net pay Isopac map, right?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm going to go back to our structure and Isopac maps, but is there anything else you want to add about this exhibit?
No, I think this illustrates what we mean by gas-water contact, and that's why I wanted to show it.
Okay. Mr. Gozo, if we can go back briefly to exhibit SR1, and then we're going to go to SR2 after that. Okay. Jim, exhibit SR1 is labeled a depth structure map, and when we get to exhibit SR2, we're gonna see that it's labeled as a gross thickness Isopac map, both for the Fallon B sand. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Yeah, the structure is the depth to the top of the sand at any point where we can measure it, and that's what that means. Isopac map, Isopac means thickness, ISO means same thickness. So the contours on Isopac are the contours showing the thickness of the sand at any particular point. That, if you bring that map up, we can discuss it.
Okay, and Mr. Gozo, can we move on to exhibit SR2, the next page, please?
Now this map is the Isopac map, which is the thickness of the sand, the Fallon B sand. At the wellbore, as indicated, the thickness is 141 feet. As you saw on the log, it actually the measured thickness is 162 feet, but correcting for the deviation of the wellbore, its actual thickness is 141 feet. The contours on this map are the thickness, they're 20-foot contour intervals, but they're relating the thickness of, or measuring the thickness of the sand. You can see the sand thins dramatically to the northeast. The sand simply doesn't exist to the northeast where the line is drawn as the limit. We can see that easily on seismic.
And that's identified. That's identified as the pinch out of the B sand on your map.
That's right. That's the pinch out. It's the line that's shown as a squiggly brown line. You can see the thickest contours would be actually 200. If you see the 160 contour and up in the right at center of section 9, and then the next contour to the right would be on 80, and then the darkest contour would be 200, and you can see that runs basically northwest southeast. So this is a thick sand. It's kind of like a finger of sand that runs through here, with the thickest part running northwest southeast. We know this sand, we can see it seismically pinch out to the right. We know somewhere it pinches out to the southwest because it's not present in the Ida well over on the town of Ontario.
Okay. So I want to, just for clarification, Exhibit SR1 is illustrating the measured depth to the tops and bottoms of the sand.
Actually, not the measured depth, but the subsea depth.
I'm sorry, subsea depth, but the differences in numbers are as measured through the wellbore, as opposed to on Exhibit SR2, which are true vertical thicknesses.
Yeah, well, actually, on the structure map is also true vertical depths from subsea.
Gotcha.
But here, this is the true thicknesses.
Okay.
This is of the sand itself. It's not of what we think will be produced. But I've put on there the gas water contact and the up dip limit of production, again, to illustrate how the productive interval, the interval or reservoir that can be produced from this wellbore are limited on this map.
Can you explain the significance of the size of the area below the gas water contact?
Well, there is a lot of sand, reservoir sand, that extends to particularly to the northwest, that is the Fallon B sand, that has not got hydrocarbons in it. It's got water in it. And that provides the support for the reservoir itself, the reservoir tract. If you, a picture being 1,000 words, I suggest you go to Exhibit 7 to illustrate what I mean.
Okay, Mr. Gozer, can you bring up Exhibit SR7? There we go. Jim, can you first explain what Exhibit SR7 is?
SR7 is a cross-section derived from the seismic and tied to the two wells that are shown on here, which are the Fallon 110 well. The well on the right is the Bridge Resources May number 113 well, drilled in section 13. That well encountered sands. As you can see, the D sand is the same in the sand seen in the at depth, measured depth of 3650 in the May well is the same as the D sand we see deeper in the Fallon well. The B sand that we see in the Fallon well is not seen in the Bridge well, the May well. Now, back, this is related to the seismic. This is the wells are tied to the seismic, and this is drawn. This seismic cross section is drawn on the using the seismic data. The wells are separated from faults as indicated. The point I wanted to make, and why I asked this to be brought up, was to show that in the Fallon well, we have a sandstone, the B sand, which has gas on water in the well. However, the reservoir sand itself, the B sand, extends well down dip, as shown here. It actually gets thicker, as seen on the Isopac map, as you move to the northwest, and it goes much further than shown here. It goes all the way to the edge of the data northwest from the Fallon well, a distance of 2.4 miles before we run out of data. That is, we hit the edge of the seismic data, and we still see this thick sand being present. That provides a big water cushion that the gas sits on. That's the explanation I wanted to make.
Okay, just generally and quickly, can you explain how a water drive mechanism works in a well?
Yeah, when the well is perforated and starts to flow in the hydrocarbon column, if you have a lot of water, as you do in this case, it will push the gas out. And as the well is produced, the gas-water contact will rise higher and higher until it gets to the perforations, and then the well will stop producing. And in this case, we are perforated kind of in the middle of the pay sand. As we produce that, the water contact will rise up, the water will push the water contact up, and then we will have to perforate the top of the sand to get all of the hydrocarbons that we can out of this well. And then the water will continue to rise as we produce the well until there's no more ability to produce out of this wellbore. The IDL has an excellent exhibit on there. It's exhibit 10 if you want to bring that up, but I'll just reference it now. It's a much expanded version of the wellbore and shows the concept very, very good, very well.
Okay. And again, just because of where the well is, the highest that can be perforated in the well and still be in the productive sand is minus 1,289 feet subsea, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, do we have experience in this area with other wells that have been produced and have exhibited a water drive?
Yeah, in Willow Field, we have several wells, and some of them are pressure depletion, and some of them are water drive, and some of them are combinations. The reason why you have water drive in one in particular, the Kaufman 134, is that it has gas on top of a large body of water, a reservoir with a lot of water in it, similar to what is shown here on Exhibit 7 on relating to the Fallon well.
And how does this well, and your view of the size of the water tank below the gas water contact, how does it compare to the experience with Kaufman 134?
This appears to be larger, at least 10% larger, based on the data we have, and possibly somewhat larger than that, because I can only go to the edge of the seismic data on this one. I looked at the Kaufman 134 and determined that it had about 180,000 acre feet of reservoir. Here we're at the Fallon, I measure seismically at over 200,000 acre feet of reservoir.
And to your knowledge, is there anybody else that's looked at this that's reached a similar conclusion?
Yes, Mark Parton of the Idaho Geologic Survey looked at the reservoir in the Kaufman 134 and agrees that that's a water drive reservoir as well. The most important information on that is the production information, which shows it's a water drive.
Gotcha. Mr. Gozo, if you could go to Exhibit SR3. Jim, can you, it's Exhibit SR3 has been displayed. Can you explain what it is, please?
Yes, this is the Isopac of the net pay as opposed to the previous one, which was the gross sand interval. This is the net pay of what we expect will be produced out of this well. Again, the IDL exhibit number 10 is a beautiful illustration of how we arrive at this. To the northwest edge, the zero line is determined by the gas water contact. As we come up to the well, we come to the actual thickest portion that can be produced. The net pay there is 70 feet. As we go to the north or to the southeast, we come to where the top of the sand in the Fallon well intersects the base of the B sand. With water drive, we simply can't produce above that. The edge, the zero line to the northeast, is caused by the pinch out of the sand. To the southwest, it's caused, the zero line is terminated against the fault, and also it is, if you look at the map, you can see that there's a contribution from the structure there as well. This is the reservoir that can be produced. The reservoir is bigger, but not related to the production capability of this well.
Because of the constraints of the sand top and the gas water contact,
and the base of the B sand. That's
yes.
Right.
Can we go, Mr. Gozo, briefly to Exhibit SR4? Jim, can you identify what Exhibit SR4 is and what it depicts for me?
This exhibit is to demonstrate the porosity and permeability of the Fallon B sand. I put this together in response to a question from Mr. Thumb. Because we do not have a direct measurement of permeability in the Fallon 110, which is the log on the right, we only have porosity information from well logs. But we can estimate the permeability of the B sand by looking at the productive wells at Willow Field. And we took cores in the ML Investments 2-10, and you can see in that log that's shown there. The core results are on the left, the log is on the right. The core samples and the log actually disagree. The cores have porosities that are higher than the porosity seen on the log. And we determined that the log porosities are correct. And that's easy to understand because when you take cores in highly porous and permeable rocks, they sometimes crumble. So when they measure the porosity and permeability in the cores, they're often higher than what's actually in the reservoir. So we determined that we need to, when we look at the, we determined we needed to use the porosity from the logs, and using that information, you can see if you can read what is written there, the porosities in the cores showed 33 to 35%, but the density showed 23 to 24%, the density logs. So I simply reduced the permeability by that same amount. Permeabilities in the cores were, you can see, mostly in the 3,500 to 3,900 millidarcies, but reducing them by the same amount that we reduced the porosity measurement, the actual permeability is probably about 2,500, 2,900 millidarcies. Using that same relationship of porosity to permeability in the Fallon well, I came up with estimating a permeability of 2,900 to 3,300 millidarcies. For those who don't know the significance of those numbers, this is highly porous and permeable rocks. These are dream reservoir rocks they're just marvelous for exploration and production.
So is that to say that there's nothing about the porosity and permeability of this sand which would impose a constraint on the drainage of the well?
No, there's nothing. In fact, this indicates a good productive reservoir.
Okay, and just so the record's clear, can you just give a 2-sentence explanation of the difference between permeability and porosity?
Yeah, porosity are the holes in the rock, the space in the rock where you can have hydrocarbons or any liquids. The permeability are the connections between the holes. You have to have connections between the holes, and that's because that's where the liquids or the gas will flow through. You can have porosity and zero permeability, and so you can't, in that case, you wouldn't be able to produce. In this case, we have both excellent porosity and excellent permeability.
Okay. I want to run through the remainder of our exhibits briefly. Mr. Gozo, if you can go to exhibit SR8. Jim, we have 3 exhibits, SR8, 9, and 10. I don't know that we need to look at all of them, but can you explain, just explain what they are?
Yes, these are the analyses of the gas samples. There were 2 gas samples were taken from the testing, and 1 liquid sample was taken, and these were analyzed. The ultimate, the important thing is the gas in here is almost completely hydrocarbons with a tiny percentage. If you go by liquid volume, it's less than 0.4% that's not hydrocarbons. You can go by mole percentage, and it's just tiny. It's almost all hydrocarbons. That's what it means. The second thing, and probably more important thing, is seen on the next page, which is, if you scroll down just a minute.
Mr. Gozo, can you go to SR9, please? Thank you.
No, go back up. You missed the page. There.
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go.
On this,
my apologies.
And this test, or this sample, you look near the middle of it, it's got ideal gross heating value, the BTU. That's the important thing. This is a BTU over 1,200. That's what's important. And the next sample, we can actually skip over it because it's got virtually the same results. The BTU in that sample was 1,206. So both samples are showing the same results.
Okay. And then the third sample that was taken was taken at
was in the liquid phase, not the gas phase. That is the condensate sample, and that is shown in the next one, I think.
Can you, Mr. Goza, can you go to the next to SR9, please?
No, it's this is the gas. That's the second gas sample. Go to the exhibit
Okay.
10.
Exhibit SR10, please.
This is an analysis of the liquid part of the reservoir. That is, when the gas is produced, liquids drop out, and the liquids here they're called condensate out of the gas production. And this, you can see, is primarily methane through octane. And this is a very nice spread of you can see we got propanes, butanes, pentanes, and et cetera. It's just to analyze and what, so that we know what we can do this with these samples.
Do the analyses of the samples in exhibits SR 8, 9, and 10, do they have any impact on your opinion of the drainage area of the well?
Now, this is not, doesn't relate to the drainage. It's just the type of fluids that come out of the reservoir,
Okay.
other than the fact that it's primarily gas. The fact that it's primarily gas over oil does impact the recoverability, yes.
In the sense that gas can drain a larger area than oil.
Well, it just has to do with reservoir dynamics rather than area.
Ah, okay. Can you, Mr. Gozer, can you go to exhibit SR 11, please? I think, Jim, this is exhibit SR 11 is an Excel spreadsheet which has multiple tabs, but I think what's reflected here is basically just the chart version of the gross data that's reported elsewhere in the spreadsheet. Okay. Can you just explain what it depicts?
Yeah, what this is showing is the testing, the results of the testing done from March 11th to March 14th of 2018. The important ones to look at are the red line is the gas rate of the test, how it was producing. What happens in the testing is they tested with different choke sizes and look at how the well performs. The second important thing is the amount of oil, or what labeled oil there, barrels per day of oil. That's one of the green curves. The pressures are significant. What the pressures you can see up there, tubing pressure is one of the curves, casing pressure. What happened and this is common, the first part of the test, you can see there's a break. On the left-hand side, the well was being tested up casing. Then there was an interruption. At that point, tubing was put in the hole, and so the rest of the test is up tubing. And that's the actual production will be out of the tubing, not out of the casing. So that's the important one there. All of these show that the well is going to produce very well at a high rate. You can see final rate was consistently about 3.8 million cubic feet a day. The oil rate is around 100 barrels a day. You can see down at a little above that.
And by oil, are we really talking about condensate in this case?
Condensate, yes.
Okay.
But just traditionally in a condensate reservoir, oil, people will call it either oil or condensate.
Right. Is there
Right.
anything in the results from the testing of the well that is inconsistent with your conclusions about the drive mechanism and likely drainage area of the well?
No, I think entirely consistent with water drive reservoir. I will.
Mr. Go ahead. Did you have something you wanted to add,
I would
Jim?
say the best, the only time you can really tell, I don't think you can tell from a test unless it's a very limited reservoir, but you really need some production to be sure what the water drive, whether it's water drive or has some combination of gas depletion drive.
Mr. Gozo, can you go to exhibit SR6, please? Mr. Thomas, do you want to take a break and fix it? You're still muted. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to let you continue on. It's been about an hour into this. So, folks, we do have a solution for this, just so everyone knows. I believe we have a solution. We are going to end the meeting, end the Zoom meeting, just so everyone is clear at the end of this. Everyone will then, I believe, come right back and click the same link and come back in. What that will enable on the back end is for us to change host from Mr. Gozo to the PIO so that they can be the main host. And then we'll be able to fit into the Facebook Live Pro Awesome license and do something that doesn't resemble how I made it through grad school. So that's my goal. Before I end the meeting though, and thank you, Mr. Christian and Mr. Allen for your patience, Chris or the PIO Scott, does that sound like a workable solution, or do you have additional directions to come? Oh wait, while you guys are thinking about that, I wanted everybody to know this whole meeting is still being recorded and will be uploaded to the state's YouTube channel. So there's no part of this that, because we're having technical problems now, won't be available to the public and everyone. I want to make sure that's understood. I'm very happy that all of the parties are able to be part of this Zoom meeting and everything is going well. There are interested people in the public and members of Mr. Piotrowski's clients that would like to watch this that are not, they have counsel here. They're represented through Mr. Piotrowski, and so we're able to fulfill that. It's going to be out there. So anyhow, that said, Chris and Scott, do you have any, was I right in what I said, or how do you think it'll play out?
Mr. Thomas, I'll defer to Scott for that answer.
Scott, are you there? Robbie? Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I want everyone to, so it's 10:43. Thank you for your patience. Let's take a little bit longer recess and plan on coming back at 11:05. All right, 11:05 Mountain Time. And when you come back
Thomas,
go ahead.
I want to make sure I understand. Are you suggesting that we are logging out of the Zoom meeting and logging back in, as well as people logging out of the Facebook meeting? Or we're just taking a recess and staying on here?
We're taking a recess. Thank you, Mr. Christian, for the question. The meeting is going to end by the host. So Chris and I will hit the end button and everybody will be popped out. Facebook Live will continue. And once we end the meeting, give it a few minutes, everyone will then come back in, click on the same link, and you'll be in the waiting room. Okay?
Okay.
And then when we get everything fired back up, I think we can, you know, take this through the main engine at that point and be able to resolve this. I want to say again, the Facebook Live thing is just a convenience that we're trying to accommodate folks who are interested. I hope everyone understands, and I appreciate your patience on this. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to come back at 11:05. Thank you, Mr. Chris, for your questions. Are there any other concerns before I do the hard reset on this? Okay, great. I appreciate that, folks. Let's go ahead and do that. Chris, pull the plug and we'll open everything back up at 11:05 or sooner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Thank you. Good, we are recording. Again, thank you everyone for your patience in this. We were able to completely resolve the technical issue. Our theory was correct, and switching host made all the difference. It looks like we've also been able to bring Mr. Allen's video online, which is a pleasant surprise. It's good to see you, Mr. Allen. Thank you so far for your testimony. I want to switch over to Facebook Live and make sure we are there. Yes, we are. Again, it's still about the same, maybe 15 to 20 second delay, but folks on Facebook will know, and that's okay. This is still being recorded. It'll all be put up on into the YouTube, Idaho Department of Land's YouTube page, and we can just watch this Christmas morning with our family or whatever you'd like. It's going to be great. So that said, Mr. Christian and Mr. Allen, I thank you for your patience. Please re-engage wherever you feel is appropriate in your testimony, and we'll go from there. I give the meeting to you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I think I have a couple of more things to cover. Mr. Gozo, if you can put up exhibit SR6.
So let's do the muting, because I think we may be getting a little bit of feedback.
I think what's happening, Jim, is if you have yourself on your phone and on your computer, you're going to get feedback. So turn the audio off on one of those.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. Thank you, Mr. Allen.
Okay. Mr. Allen, exhibit SR6, can you explain what information it includes briefly?
Yes, these are answers to questions that Mr. Thumb asked me, and I'll just go through them. They're basic information of the well bore. The first is what the water saturation of the net pay in the Fallon, and that's a little over 40%. That's calculated by an outside independent engineering firm. The second question was what the reservoir temperature of the sand, that was measured at 140 degrees. The next question, G, was the gas analysis, which is the information that we looked at before, showing the BTU of the gas, and also the gas oil ratio is 81,220. That was on the well completion report filed with the state. The next is the gas formation volume factor. That has to do with, we have the reservoir pressures that are measured in the well, but the gas formation factor tries to calculate what, if you took that reservoir from the well and brought it to the surface, how that would change, and that's what the gas formation volume factor does. The next question is the original gas in place, which is calculated by the engineer based on our geologic and geophysics work. That's a little over 7 BCF, and his recovery factor of 48% gives us a little over 3.4 BCF recoverable out of this wellbore. And that that's calculated by that same engineer, Mr. McCallum of Coutre and Associates. Oops.
Just as a matter of follow-up to that, with respect to the calculations you had performed by Mr. McGowan, is it normal for you to consult with other engineers with expertise to perform particular calculations in the course of your work?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people like to go to outside engineers who are not influenced by the in-company people, so they can get an objective evaluation. And I personally like to go outside because I am a geophysicist, not an engineer, so I like to get engineers to look at the data and come back with an answer in keeping with engineering practices.
And based on your experience and the information that you've been able to see yourself, did the calculations you provide to you appear reasonable?
Yes, they do.
I don't want to step on Mr. Thumb's toes, but you had mentioned that you would like to comment on IDL's Exhibit 10 as an illustration of what you've been talking about. Does anybody have any objection to Mr. Allen to displaying IDL's Exhibit 10 and having Mr. Allen speak to it briefly?
Mr. Christian, thank you for that question. I believe Mr. Thumb will address Exhibit 10 during his testimony. However, I do leave it up to his discretion if he would allow that exhibit to be used currently.
Mr. Thomas, I have no problems with that.
Okay, for clarity, I would like to make sure that this exhibit is just being posted for Mr. Allen to talk about it. We are not at a place where we're going to have cross-examination about this exhibit at this time. Mr. Allen is simply using the IDL's exhibit to convey a point. Go ahead. Chris, you're going to have to pull it up so that Mr. Allen is able to talk about what he needs to. So please, you guys work that out.
Okay, not a problem, Mr. Thomas. And so I will be using, just for clarification, the amended document that Joy sent out earlier, correct?
I think that's true, yes.
Okay, let me go ahead and share that out.
And thank you, Mr. Thumb and Mr. Thomas.
Okay, and do we know whereabouts the exhibit is?
It would be, go ahead, Jim.
It's near the end. I think there's 11 exhibits. Exhibit 10 is the one we'd like to look at.
Yeah, second or third to last page.
This Exhibit 10 here is a blow-up of the area, and it is an excellent illustration of the points I was trying to make when we talked about the limit of the productive area. To the northwest, the limit of the productive area is obviously the gas-water contact. There's no gas down dip of that level. As you go up dip, though, the limit of the productive area is the top of the perforations at the top of the sand, and where you can't, on a water drive, you can't produce gas above the top of the sand. And so the limit is aerially to the southeast is where that gas, or the top of the sand, intersects the base of the B sand. And so, as indicated on this exhibit produced by IDL, hydrocarbon, there's an arrow showing the volume here that's producible from this wellbore. You can also see that the maximum thickness is at the wellbore, and as you move, that is, the maximum thickness of the producible volume is at the wellbore as you move to the northwest it thins, and as you move to the southeast, it thins. I just think this is a brilliant, an excellent exhibit illustrating the concepts involved in the limits of the reservoir, producible reservoir.
Okay, thank you. Jim, based on your professional education and experience and the information that we've discussed in exhibits SR1 through SR11 and your own review of the well logs, the seismic data, and the well test data, is it your opinion that the spacing area that's been requested will result in the efficient and economical development of the pool as a whole?
Yes.
And based on that same information, is it your opinion that the requested spacing area is not smaller than the maximum area that can be efficiently and economically drained by one well?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas, that's all I have for Mr. Allen at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. I appreciate it. And again, one more time, thank you everyone for your patience with this. Let me scan through my notes real quick. I think at this point, I would say thank you and open up to Mr. Piotrowski. You may ask questions. Well, pardon me. Mr. Christian, just for confirmation, do you have any more witnesses at this time?
I do not, Mr. Thomas.
Okay, thank you. I thought so. Mr. Piotrowski, you may ask questions of the witness.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, we've still got the Idaho Department of Lands, page 10 of their exhibits up on the screen. So that's as good a place to start as any. If I understand it correctly, this document shows where the wellbore intersects the sand B, and I just want to make sure I understand. Your explanation was that basically the point of intersection defines what is the upper limit of the, or maybe it's the lower limit, but basically that perforated area defines the limit of what this well can produce from this reservoir. Is that right?
That's correct.
So if there were a well bore that were drilled somewhere in a higher point of sand B, which on this schematic would be, appearing over to the right, would such a well bore be capable of extracting a higher percentage of the hydrocarbons in this pool?
Yes.
Okay. But this document shows the limits of what the existing Fallon 110 well could produce.
That's correct.
Okay. I'd like to go back if I could. Let me figure out which document it is I need. It's I want to make sure I understand this, because let's, if we could please look at exhibit SR1, Mr. Gozo.
Okay, one moment. Let me go ahead and pull that up.
Thanks, Chris.
There we go.
Okay, so first you've used the phrase as depths sub-C. Could you clarify that phrase for me, sub-C?
Yes, that's a number, for example, 1289 sub-C means it's 1,289 feet from sea level.
Okay. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. And so this exhibit 1 is intended to show the top of the sand B. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the intersection of the Fallon 110 well bore with sand B does that occur at the highest point of sand B, or does that occur at a lower point on sand B?
It's not the highest point of sand B. The higher point is, you can see on the map, sand B continues up as you go to the southeast.
Okay. Okay. Now you've got a, where was it? There was a, if you look at, oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page of my own notes here. So the Isopac that you've drawn, let's look if we can at the net pay Isopac map, exhibit SR3. Do I understand correctly that the contour lines here indicate that portion of the pool that you believe can be produced through the Fallon 110 well?
That's correct.
Okay. And is it true then that if we were to hypothesize that there were a different well reaching a different point of the pool, would the net pay Isopac map end up being modified for a different well bore?
Yes, that would be a different well, though. We're talking about this one.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to get. So for this well, exhibit 3 shows the net pay that can be developed from this well, in your opinion?
Correct.
Okay. Is there any way to determine what would be the most efficient way to produce from this pool? Not with this well, but I just mean if you were coming into this with no previous wells drilled and you had this information about the pool, would it be possible to develop a more efficient method of extracting the hydrocarbons from this pool?
There can be other wells drilled elsewhere in this pool, yes. And it could be more efficiently drained from another well, but right now we're talking about this well and draining this reservoir from this well.
Okay. If we talk about just this pool, though, the conclusions you reach if you were looking at this pool without an existing well could be different. Is that right?
Well, yes.
Okay. In the course of your analysis, did you evaluate any of the deeper sands below sand B?
Yes, we evaluated. There's a sand called sand D, which is on my cross section is the same sand as the one over to in the May 113 well.
And does any of the information that you've presented here today reflect what would be a most efficient way to develop the sand D underneath the Fallon, or as part of the Fallon well?
There's no hydrocarbons in sand D, no productive hydrocarbons in sand D in this wellbore.
Okay. And based on your analysis, did you identify any other hydrocarbons that could be produced by the Fallon 110 well?
There are some hydrocarbons shallower and a much thinner sand in this well. This unit is for the B sand, but not the A sand.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, based on what you've seen, are you aware of any other recoverable hydrocarbons, anywhere within the area reached by the Fallon 110 well?
In this well bore, there are only 2 sands with hydrocarbons, A and B.
And if we look at exhibit SR5, I'm seeing what's identified as stand A, and it looks like minus 1191 sub C, and there's some red shading up there. Is that shallower sand you said also contains some hydrocarbons?
That's correct.
Okay. You're not aware of recoverable hydrocarbons deeper than the stand B?
That's correct. Not producible hydrocarbons.
Okay. You've identified what you consider to be the probable gas-water contact point. For instance, on this exhibit 5 we're looking at, it's actually labeled as probable gas-water contact. You know, as I'm sure you know, a probability can be anywhere between 1% and 100%. What do you consider the level of probability that you've properly identified the gas-water contact point here?
I would say somewhere well above 90% with a plus or minus maybe 5 feet.
Okay. Okay, turning back, if we could do exhibit SR3. If I understand it, well, you've already made clear to me the contour lines, the curved shapes that are numbered as contour lines. That describes your best estimate based on the data available of the recoverable portion of the pool V10 well. Do I have that correct?
Correct.
And the blue line indicates what is now is the proposed 300-acre spacing unit requested by Snake River Oil and Gas. Is that also correct?
That's correct.
Okay. It seems to me we're fitting a round block into a square hole here. Why have you chosen to do that?
This proposed unit is based upon the law. It's a geographic unit. It's drawn as a rectangle. That's the normal practice in every state. You put the reservoir as best you can inside a rectangle. There's only one state that I know of that allows non-rectangular units or non-geographic units, and that state allows both. But Idaho's law calls for these geographic units. That's typical in the industry in every other state, except one.
Okay, now in this case, these particular lines to define the unit appear to be excluding a very small portion on the east side of what you consider to be the recoverable pool. Is there any reason not to move that line a little bit farther east and capture all of the suspected pool?
I think the reason is that in terms of landowners, there's a very tiny amount that's outside the unit. And administratively, it's easier to draw a unit boundary at the midline of in this case, the midline of the section.
Now, if we look at the boundary described here on the west side, that is not at the midline of a section, is it?
No, it's at the quarter section line.
Okay, and that by placing that line there, it's including will also include acreage that is not believed to actually overlie any of the recoverable hydrocarbons, correct?
That's true.
And the same is true of the northern boundary, that ends up including property that does not overlie the recoverable hydrocarbons, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Other than administrative convenience, is there any reason you know of to draw the unit as a rectangle rather than as some other shape?
Not being a lawyer, I don't know exact terms of the Idaho law, but this is general practice in the industry to draw them in this manner. The point is to be sure that you have the producible reservoir inside the unit and that you can effectively drain this reservoir from this wellbore in this unit.
Okay, you've indicated that you had, well, if we could scroll down to exhibit SR6. You had an engineer calculate the water saturation of the net pay at 40.69%. Can you explain to me what the water saturation means?
Yes, any reservoir, even though it's got a lot of hydrocarbons in it, also has some water in it. And that's the calculation, is percentage of water in that pay sand. That water can be movable, and in most cases, and in this case, the actual water is in spaces in the porosity of the reservoir, and it won't be moved when the well is produced. But that actually reduces the amount of porosity available to a reservoir.
And does that affect what can be effectively produced from this well?
It has an effect, and that effect is taken into account by the recovery factor that's calculated by the engineer.
Okay, so let's move on to that. The recovery factor of 48.1%, as I understand it, and I'm trying to make sure I got this right, because this is not my field, but that means that the Fallon 110 well, the engineer believes will be able to recover 48.1% of the hydrocarbons in that pool. Is that what it means?
That's in that zone, yes. In that volume that we are going to produce. In every reservoir, everywhere, some hydrocarbons are left behind when you produce a well. It's not physically possible to get them all out. But with this is excellent quality rock, and the recovery factor of 48% is an excellent recovery factor. We're going to get nearly half of the hydrocarbons that are in the well by producing it.
Okay. Now that we have, now that there's more information about this pool than there was when the Fallon well was drilled, is it fair to say that that recovery factor could be made higher if we relocated the well, or if we had relocated the well back in 2017 or 18 when it was drilled?
The recovery factor is based on the properties in this wellbore, and the placing it somewhere else, you could get a lower recovery factor. This is based on the rock properties in this well, which are quite good.
Okay. But is it the rock properties in the sand B that matter, or is it the rock properties throughout the length of the well bore that matter?
It's the rock properties in the B sand in the wellbore that matter.
Okay. And so had the well been placed differently, we might get different recovery factors. Is that right?
That's right. Although if we maintain these kind of rock properties, we would get the same recovery factor.
Okay. Does the recovery factor also take into account that that upper limit we were talking about of where the wellbore intersects the top of the sand?
The recovery factor is not affected by that upper limit. The recovery factor is how much hydrocarbons you're going to get out of this particular reservoir that's producible out of this well. If you put, I'll leave that. I hope I said that so that the explanation was clear. If it's not, restate it, and I'll try again.
Well, let's remember this 48% figure and take a look if we could. Let me see here. Oh, no, that's not going to be easy. Let me try it this way. I'm still just trying to understand this 48%. Does that mean that the engineer believes that we will recover 48% of all of the hydrocarbons that are in this pool, or?
No.
Okay.
Well, when you say this pool, not the entire, you have the pool that is the hydrocarbons in the B sand, let's say south of this well, and that is south of the unit, and what we're proposing in the unit. The 48% factor relates to the gas in place in this producible area.
Okay.
We're going to recover 48% of the gas in place. You can take any reservoir anywhere in the world and you can calculate the gas in place, but you're not going to produce all of that. You're only going to produce a percentage. And in this case, the calculation is we'll produce 48% of it. And that, with these same rock properties, if you moved south off of this unit line and had another well, you as long as you have the same rock properties, you'll come up with the same 48%.
Okay. If we could scroll down to exhibit SR7. Now, as I understand SR7, on the left, we have a representation of the Fallon well and the B sand.
Correct.
And I'm looking at that small part of the B sand that extends a little bit higher than the minus 1300 figure.
Right.
And you've got the note there that if it's a water drive, then the 110 cannot drain above the top of the sand. And right. So there's some small part of the sand that this well can't produce. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And so when we talk about 48% recovery, are we talking about recovering 48% of everything, all the hydrocarbons that are above the gas water contact line?
No. We're talking, we're not talking about, nothing will be recovered, above the gas water contact up to the top of B sand. Yes, that's the recovery factor for the amount of gas we will get between the top of the B sand and the gas water contact.
Okay.
We're not recovering the hydrocarbons, any of the hydrocarbons above where the top of the B sand intersects the base of the B sand as shown on
Okay. So this particular well is going to leave some hydrocarbons unrecoverable, but those not included in the 48% factor. Is that right?
I'm not sure I followed you there, sir, but
Okay.
we're not going to, of what can be recovered from this well, there is a percentage that's going to be left behind in that zone below the top of the B sand and between the gas water content. There is always, in every reservoir that's produced, there's always some gas left behind.
So just to make sure I understand, your analysis is based on the Fallon 110 well as it exists, and does not take into account whether some other well could produce differently in this same pool or reservoir. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Piotrowski. Make sure I'm going through my notes here, just a moment. Okay, Nick, up there. There you go. Ms. Bonnie, do you have any questions of the witness at this time?
I do not, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Vega, you may ask questions of the witness if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Given the technical nature of Mr. Allen's testimony and pursuant to IDAPA 04.11.01.157, as well as the permission granted in the July 21st, 2020 pre-hearing order and notice of hearing, I am going to turn over IDL's examination of Mr. Allen to Mr. James Thumb, who is IDL's Minerals Program Specialist.
James, go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Mr. Thomas?
Mr. Thumb, go ahead.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
We've got you.
Jim, I appreciate the presentation you've given today. And before we proceed, do you go by Mr. Allen or Dr. Allen?
Well, I prefer Jim.
Okay, we'll go by Jim then. Thank you. So I just have a couple of brief questions. As I said, I appreciate the presentation you gave today. I think it was technically very thorough and covered all the bases that the department wanted to see. I do have just a couple of questions, mostly as it pertains to recoveries and the reservoir drive. So you mentioned in your presentation today that the sand, and we can leave this display up because this is a good one to kind of demonstrate what I'm asking. You say that the sand continues down dip approximately 2.5 miles to the end of the seismic data. Other than the Fallon 110 well, are there any other wells in this area that penetrate this sand or have encountered this sand?
No, only the Fallon 110 has seen this B sand.
So your estimate of the extent of this B sand is based purely on what?
On the seismic data. On the seismic data, we can see the top and the base of the B sand, and that's so I can map the both the top of the sand and an Isopac map of the sand. And the top of the sand is easily seen and carried out, as I said, to the northwest about 2.5 miles from the wellbore. And then I run out of data.
So based on that, and based on the other questions that have been asked regarding this sand, there are no other wells that you can derive geologic data in regards to this sand in the area?
No. The other wells in the area, whether it's a May well, Barlow well, or Idaho well, or any other wells, simply do not contain this sand, and in this interval they either have siltstone or clay stones.
Thank you. You also stated in the application declaration that was submitted along with the application that there are multiple types of reservoir drives that exist in the Willow Field. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you also made reference to a presentation given by Mark Barton of Idaho Geological Survey in regards to 2 wells or 3 wells that were in close proximity that possibly exhibited multiple drive types. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And today you did state as well that with all this information that we have, the bottom line to determine what is the correct or what is the overall drive mechanism for the reservoir is to allow the well to produce.
That's right. We allow the well to produce and allow the water, what we expect to be water drive, to push the gas out of the reservoir.
Okay, thank you. You also, as part of the information that you provided to the department, you showed a core analysis for the ML Investments 210 well, which is located in the Willow Field. Now, that core information and that well information is not from the Fallon Field, but is this a common practice in industry to use a close proximity field as an analogy to an area that you are trying to examine?
Yes, particularly when we have similar rock properties between the 2 fields. They're not precisely the same age rocks, but they're close in age, and they have very similar rock properties. So that's an easy analog to make.
Thank you. And one other question in regards to the core analysis that was provided by Core Labs for that ML210 well. It was somewhat difficult for me to read, but I was able to glean most of the information from that I needed. I noticed that the permeability measurements for the cores were permeability to air. So all the measurements for permeability were permeability to air. Are you aware of any core analysis in the field that was done taking measurements for permeability to liquids?
I am not aware.
Okay. But in general, can you state that the permeability to air versus permeability to liquids, when you compare the two, in general, that permeability to liquids tends to be less?
Yes, certainly.
I think that's all the questions I have, unless Ms. Vega has any additional questions that she'd like to ask.
I do not, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate the additional feedback on that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Thumb. Mr. Christian, at this time, if you would like to, I offer you the opportunity to redirect.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Very briefly, Jim, Mr. Piotrowski asked you a series of questions based on a hypothetical other well. You recall those questions?
Yes.
Are you aware of the surface conditions in this area? I know you're a geophysicist and you mostly look underground, but are you aware of some of the surface conditions here?
I know that there is a lot of development. The town of Fruitland is verging on this, or we are verging on the town of Fruitland. It's enough development that it's difficult to find well placement. That's why the Fallon well was deviated from the surface and not vertical.
That's to say,
but I don't get into the details of the land. I'm looking at it from a geologic perspective.
Okay, but generally speaking, if for example, this well was drilled on a deviated basis because it was not possible to obtain a surface location from which to drill the well vertically, right?
That's correct.
And is it true that if another well were drilled somewhere else, hypothetically, some other location, we don't know where, that could impact wherever that surface location is, that could impact where that well is able to intersect the B sand, right?
Definitely.
Okay. I don't have any other questions, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. I do have a few questions that I'd like to move forward to you, and if you need to direct them to your witnesses needed, of course, that's fine. Just for clarity, we've got a broad audience who has access to this hearing, especially via Facebook, and so I'm just going to ask something that maybe some of us know and some of us don't. You as the operator and the department also, but I'm focusing on the operator currently, the applicant, indicates the gas water content in a few drawings. For clarity, that gas water, or pardon, not content, that gas water interface, above the interface is hydrocarbons, because this could be a wet gas also. Are you sharing, is it your understanding that that gas water interface contact includes any wet gas or condensate or anything would be above that actual water line?
That's right. Above the gas water contact are hydrocarbons. Below the gas water contact is water.
Thank you. That was my understanding. I just wanted to clarify that. These next few questions are going to be directed to Mr. Christian. Again, you can use your witnesses as needed. Just a few of them. Let's see. First, the applicant requests that the order approve the Fallon 110 in its existing location. Does that request include the surface location, the bottom hole, and the entire wellbore?
Well, certainly include. Jim? Jim?
No, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure. I thought he was asking you, but it was quiet, so I wasn't sure.
Certainly it includes the surface location and the extent of the intersection with sand B. And in other words, for purposes of production, I'm not sure I'm getting your question correctly, but for purposes of production, that's the requested spacing area would include that. I'm Yeah, I may have missed the point of your question.
No, you're totally fine. I just wanted to confirm that the request for the application included the bottom hole, the wellbore, and the surface location. I think that.
Yeah, it would include the entire wellbore.
Thank you. The second question is, frankly, built on that. Is all of the property over the wellbore, the physical wellbore, under lease?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
I know that the surface location is, but I think both leased and subject to a surface use agreement, and the intersection with Sand B is leased.
Thank you. Just go through some of my other questions. Thank you, Mr. Christian. So given that we don't know if the entire wellbore is under lease, and again, this is just a question, I'm not inferring it should or should not be. What is your opinion on if this application should or could be approved?
Well, this application is directed to spacing only, and not to integration of mineral interests, which could impact that subject.
Understood.
This, to my understanding, you know, we're under 47.318, and the entire focus is establishing what is the most appropriate spacing area for the well.
Very good, Mr. I appreciate that. I don't have any further questions for Mr. Christian at this time, or for your witness. I appreciate that. It is currently 11:57. I next will hand over to the Idaho Department of Lands, but before we do that, I would like to recommend we take a lunch break, because the next segment could probably go, it could be 15 minutes, it could be 2 hours. So I would like to say it's 11:57. If we can all come back here at 12:40 Mountain Time and restart this, that would be great. Y'all can leave your connections open and intact. I mean, obviously mute and turn the video off as you see fit, but we don't have to sign off and sign back on unless you want to. But at that point, I'm going to say let's reconvene at 12:40 p.m. Mountain Time. And Chris, you could stop the recording. Good. Thank you very much. Before we dig into the afternoon, I do have one thing to clarify, to clean up. After the recording stopped around noon, and there were a few of us still on the Zoom meeting and still being broadcast on Facebook Live. Applicant counsel, Mr. Christian, asked if Mr. Allen could be dismissed, and I agreed, but Mr. Piotrowski, really any counsel, I didn't hear anything from you at that time, but you know, on the record, you know, I guess what I'm asking, is that okay? Or are we going to need to get Mr. Allen back this afternoon for any further questions you may have of him?
This is James Piotrowski. No, I have no objection to his departure.
Thank you, Mr. Piotrowski. I appreciate that. That helps. I appreciate it. Thank you. So we are back. It's 12:48. We had a nice lunch. I think at this point, we're going to go ahead and move on from Snake River, who gave us information this morning, to the department. So department, Ms. Vega, you may call your first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. We would call Mr. James Thumb, please. Mr. Thumb, would you please state your full legal name?
My full name is James Arthur Thumb.
Are you currently employed?
Yes, I am.
Where are you currently employed?
At Idaho Department of Lands.
What is your current position at the Idaho Department of Lands?
I'm the Minerals Program Specialist
How long have you fulfilled the duties of the Minerals Program Specialist?
since June of 2020.
Prior to being the department's Minerals Program Specialist, did you work as the Oil and Gas Program Manager for IDL's Oil and Gas Division?
Yes, I did.
What was your time frame in that position?
Approximately 4 years and 3 months.
Do you hold any higher education degrees or certificates?
I do. I have a bachelor's degree in geology and a master's of science degree in geophysics.
Prior to working for Idaho Department of Lands, did you have employment in the oil and gas industry?
I did approximately 30 plus years in the industry, working for a variety of companies, major companies and smaller companies. I also had a consulting business for 10 years. I've worked exploration, production, reservoir development projects, both in the US and in Latin America. And I've also worked coal bed methane, gas storage, and geothermal projects throughout the United States.
When an application to establish a spacing unit is filed with the department's Oil and Gas Division, do you have a role in evaluating that application?
Yes, I do.
What is your role in evaluating such an application?
When the application is submitted to the department, I have to evaluate it for the content based on what is required under statute. After doing that, we can request additional information from an applicant to determine whether or not we have enough data within the application to make a determination for their request. Once all that data is submitted, then I actually do the technical evaluation and make a recommendation based on that technical information submitted.
Ms. Vega, if you don't mind, I appreciate the introduction. We got it. We introduced the name very well, but then we went into some other things. I'd like to swear the witness in if we get too much further, if you don't mind.
Oh, yes, please do. Thank you.
All right.
I've
Thank
been
you very
lying
much.
up to this point, sorry.
You know, I can corroborate everything he has said so far. I will now offer the oath to the witnesses. Mr. Thumb, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give at the hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the interruption there. Go ahead, Ms. Vega.
Mr. Thumb, have you had an opportunity to review the spacing unit application of Snake River Oil and Gas LLC that is before the hearing officer in this matter?
Yes, I have.
Did you also have an opportunity to review the applicant's exhibits following their delivery by Mr. Christian this past Monday?
I have done a preliminary review of them to answer some specific questions I had, but as far as a full technical review, no, that would take a bit more time. But I did get enough information from that to satisfy what I needed.
So when the Oil and Gas Division first received the application, did you have questions based on that original application?
Yes, and I submitted a letter requesting additional technical information on approximately March 2nd of this year. And the applicant complied in both a supplemental submittal a short time after that initial letter, and then just recently on Monday of this week.
Do you believe that you've received all the information that you had requested in the earlier letter from you?
Yes, I have.
I might have asked you this already, but I have forgotten the answer if I did. Did you have the opportunity to listen to Dr. Allen's testimony today?
Yes, I did.
Based upon your review of the pending application and the hearing exhibits submitted by the applicants, have you received sufficient information in order to make a recommendation regarding the pending spacing unit application?
Yes, I have.
Mr. Gozo, would you please display IDL's amended exhibit 1?
I can. Bear with me one moment.
Thank you. Mr. Thumb, do you recognize this document that's being displayed?
Yes, I do. It's the materials that I submitted to the hearing officer on Monday.
And has this particular, so this one has been base numbered amended IDL 1 through 12, I believe. Did you make an alteration to the exhibit that was originally submitted on Monday?
Yes, I did. I added one slide in the sequence of the 3 slides showing the cross-section through the proposed unit, just to try and add some clarity to what the request entailed.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas, I would request that IDL's amended exhibit 1 be admitted as an exhibit in this matter.
Thank you, Ms. Vega. That sounds like a good idea. I admit it.
Mr. Thumb, based on your training, education, experience, and analysis of the evidence presented in support of the pending application, have you prepared a recommendation based on and supported by this amended exhibit number 1?
Yes, I have.
And would you please take this opportunity to provide information of that recommendation and your conclusions?
Thank you, Ms. Vega. Mr. Thomas, anything before I get started?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gozo, can you hear me okay?
I can, Mr. Thumb.
Okay, can we go to slide 2, please? Thank you. First, I would like to commend the applicant for their response to the additional information that the department has requested to evaluate this request. I feel like this is probably the most complete from a technical standpoint in terms of a spacing request that the state has had. There's more than sufficient information here for us to make a decision, and very appreciative of the applicant and in particular of Dr. Allen this morning in his presentation to everyone. So with that, the first couple of slides that I provided, I'm adding those more for informational purposes so that everyone can be on the same page. I feel like in the past, sometimes we've had so many disjointed displays that we're constantly referencing pieces of paper and we can't find what's being talked about. So this first slide is a map of the Payette area, specifically around the wells in what they call the Harmon Field area. And it shows the outlines in purple, the solid purple outlines are all the existing spacing integration units in this area. The dashed purple lines are units that have been applied for that are no longer active or no longer valid for various reasons. The light blue boxes indicate the 2 applications that we've received, and then the one that has the yellow highlight is the one that we're going to talk about today and what we've been talking about since this morning. All the wells are indicated on there, and in particular in in 01-001, you can see the location of the Fallon well. The hatchet area that you see, the black hatchet area, is the city of Fruitland city limits. These were taken from the information that IDL has on record in the GIS department, and we've requested that they put that on the map for reference. And also the sand and unit indications for each one of the applications are indicated in each one of those corresponding blocks. So hopefully this will provide some useful reference for everybody going forward. Next slide, please, Mr. Gozo. This is the same map, and it just depicts a more detailed location of the cross-section that was submitted with the applicant in the supplemental declaration provided by Dr. Allen, which came in a couple of weeks after the initial application. But it shows the location of the 4 wells within within the application. So the Fallon well is the second circled well from the left side of the screen. And that is the one well that in this area is the only well that has encountered what they refer to as the Fallon B sand. And part of my questioning of Dr. Allen this morning was to confirm that that is the only well in the area that has encountered that sand, and he did confirm that. But this just shows you the location of all the wells utilized in that section. Next slide, please. So this is a map that was taken from the initial application 2016 showing the approximately 620 acre proposed unit. And that is the dark black outline. Within that dark black outline is a lighter blue outline, which is the current proposed 300 acre unit. There's been a lot of discussions about why this boundary has to change so much. And it's simply a matter of, at the time in 2016, the default spacing for the state of Idaho for a gas well was 640 acres. Since that time, when that unit was approved, the well was drilled and additional geologic information was acquired. So as is typically done in the industry, an operator will take that information, reassess what their initial estimates were based on sand thickness, where the hydrocarbons are, and several other geologic factors to determine whether or not that original unit was valid or should it be revised. And in this case, the operator, it appears, has done that. They've evaluated that technical data. They've revised the unit to a different size, which is more appropriate to whatever current data we have on hand today. Next slide, please. This display is the information as required under statute. All operators have to submit well log information. A log is basically a tool that's lowered into the well to make measurements of the geologic formations and what they may contain. And this is basically how you acquire your technical information to assess whether or not there are hydrocarbons that you can produce in the well. On the left-hand side is what's referred to as a mud log. So as you're drilling the well, you don't always have tools that can measure the formations directly. So you have a geologist on site who is taking samples from the well cuttings as they're brought up with the mud, the drilling mud that's in the well. Along with that, there can be a detector at the surface that indicates whether or not there's gas contained within those samples or within that mud. So the red curve that you see indicates the gas curve, or what gas was found in the well as they drilled through that section. So I've drawn 2 lines on there in yellow. There's the upper yellow line is the top of the B sand, and for both logs, it shows that corresponding interval, and the same with the lower one. The yellow line shows the corresponding base of that sand. One of the discussions that we've had this morning was in regards to where is the actual water zone or wet zone located in the well. There's various information that's used. So we discussed a conventional log, which is the log that's on the right. And we discussed core information and test information. And this is just one more tool that we use. So the department had this. So I evaluated the mud log along with the conventional log on the right to determine, in my best guess, where I thought the probable water contact was. And I also did this utilizing some of the wells from Willowfield and knowing what types of response we had for the base of the hydrocarbon zone. And I came up with this, the dashed blue line on my own based on that information. And surprisingly, it corresponded within probably 10 feet of what the operator had picked. So I felt confident that that was a valid pick for the base of the hydrocarbon zone within that B sand. In addition, you'll see on most of my displays, I have this red horizontal striped area, which is called the perforated interval. So in the wellbore, once they set casing in the well, they will perforate that casing to do the testing for the zone that they're interested in. So all the well information that you see on here will have that perforated interval, which is 3815 to 3835 measured depth in the wellbore, and it's all indicated in red. So that's a good reference point for everyone. And I think we're ready for the next slide. So I had this slide included because, again, as part of their statutory obligations, an operator has to submit a well completion report for the state, and they have to submit a report for every zone they test. So in the case of the Fallon 110, they submitted test information for sand B, which is the interval that they're interested in. And I circled the area in red to show that testing can occur over a longer period of time, but the information that we receive and that they're required to submit is only a summary of that final testing information. So one of the supplemental data requests that I made was for that complete testing information, because it can give you valid technical information to make a determination about the size, the extent, and possibly even the drive mechanism for the well. So as of Monday, the operator did submit that, and I can confirm that based on that spreadsheet, those hours of testing that were indicated on the completion reports are valid. Next slide, please. So this is the net pay Isopac that we looked at this morning that was provided by the operator. This was also in the initial application. And the solid red line with the little square is the location of the found well within the proposed unit, which is indicated with the dark blue dashed line. And then what I did to try and simplify the explanation of what they were asking for is to put together a schematic depicting the orientation of the sand with the position of the wellbore and how it intercepts that sand body. And it's all the displays that we see indicate it appears that the wells are vertical and everything is in a vertical sense, but that's not the case in the real world. In the 3D sense, there are various angles and orientations of the reservoir that have to be considered when you go and look at evaluating whether or not that's appropriate. So what I've done here is to just show you on their net pay Isopac the location of the schematic that I have showing the pool in relation to the well bore. So go to the next slide, please. So there's a series of 4 of these. In the initial materials that I submitted, there were 3, but I added 1 more just to try and clarify this. The kind of information that Dr. Allen discussed this morning that's a pool I swim in all the time. So I understand that technical data backwards and forwards, but for people who aren't used to looking at it every day, it can lead to some confusion. So I tried to add these displays just to add a little bit of clarity to what they were asking. So the yellow zone that you see in there is a cross section through sand B, and that would be oriented from the northwest to the southeast approximately. The dark line that cuts through that from the upper left to lower right would be an approximation of the Fallon 110 well bore through that sand B. And as I noted earlier, all the perforated intervals are noted with the horizontal red hatch, the horizontal red and white hatch. So the existing perforations in the well are located approximately in the middle of that, and they are above the gas water contact in that sand. The net pay Isopac that the operator and the applicant submitted for this well is that area is indicated with that red dashed area. Where the existing perforations are, that well could only drain up to the top of those perforations from the current gas water contact up. So they are limited by how much hydrocarbons are in the lower part of the well, as indicated by the gas water contact, which we showed you in the well information, and the top of those perforations. So as that water encroaches or moves up in the reservoir, as they produce the hydrocarbons, you can only produce until you get to the top of those perforations, and then no more production can occur. So next slide, please. In the application, Mr. Allen noted that the operator would likely move those perforations up at some point to try and capture the hydrocarbons in the upper part of the sand, because as I mentioned, as the water moves up in the well, you can no longer produce it. So you have to move up in that section to try and produce those hydrocarbons out of that pool. So you can see that I've indicated the wetter transition zone where the water occurs in that sand. As they produce it, that blue line, the angled line, indicates that the water is moving up in the well as the hydrocarbons are produced. At the same time, the gas water contact moves up to a new location. So when they reperforate the well at a higher interval, they can only go as high as where that sand is encountered. And in this case, that position where they penetrated the sand is not the top of the sand, but it's only the top of that interval. So as they move to the top, that gas water contact moves up, and they're effectively done producing that well. They are limited to what is within that zone between the red dashed horizontal line and the solid dashed line. Next slide, please. And this is just indicating that, let me move this out of the way here. There we go. So as you can see, as that moves up and they produce the hydrocarbons out of that interval, once that's produced, they're done. They can't produce anything any higher than that. So the net pay Isopac is essentially what is depicted between those two lines, the solid red line and the dashed red line, and that is equal to what we call the pool. So next slide, please. And I just added this morning just to show you that that area in orange would basically be the zone that is defined as the pool, and it is all that can be produced out of that wellbore. Next slide, please. So based on the information that was provided by the applicant, the supplemental information that we received this week, and the department's evaluation, I can say that based on the log information, the Fallon 110 well appears to have encountered the water leg in the sand pool. So what this does is it establishes not only the lower boundary of the hydrocarbons, but also the northwest boundary, because the hydrocarbons just don't exist any farther than that. Based on the drilling angle of the Fallon 110 and the geometry of that B sand, it's probable that this well will only drain what is indicated by the Fallon B sand net Isopac. I mean, physically, they just can't produce anything higher than that. There's a lot of discussion about the drive mechanism for the well, and I had some supplemental questions for Mr. Allen in regards to that. And in general, I think the operator thinks that this is a water drive reservoir, but as Mr. Allen stated, until you produce the well, you don't know. This is just a best guess based on the information that we have, the way the wells have produced in the Willow field, and given the fact that these reservoir sands have a very high porosity and permeability, meaning that the hydrocarbons should flow readily through them, that even if it's not a strong water drive, there is a very, very strong water support for the production in this well, which means that as they produce it, the water will encroach into the reservoir and limit how much they can produce this well. So based on the maps and the information that they've provided, I think it's the department's opinion that the 300 acres that they're proposing for the size of the pool for the Fallon B sand would be appropriate. And I have a couple other comments that aren't on this slide. Let me refer to my notes here. So, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of discussion about sizes of and appropriate sizes of the reservoirs and the units out here. And keep in mind that every time a well is drilled, we get more information. This is a very immature basin in terms of hydrocarbon production. The operators out here have drilled a total of maybe 25 wells, of which only about 10 of them have been productive and have been put on production. And that production's occurred over a fairly short period of time. If you compare it to some of the other activity that's occurring around the country for some of these other plays, some of the resource plays that we don't have here, we only have conventional plays. Those plays have existed for almost the same time, and yet they have thousands and thousands of wells to gather information, production history, a lot more information that they can base their determinations on drainage areas. So what we get here is a very small amount of data, but it's adequate to make an intelligent assessment about what the size of the reservoir should be. So even though the department hasn't completed a complete technical evaluation of all the information, we've reviewed it enough to understand that it does confirm what the operator and the applicant are asking for here. feel comfortable that that technical information supports their request. And more importantly for us, this establishes a baseline of information that we can use going forward to look at as we move forward and space other areas in the Payette Basin. So this was very important, and I appreciate, again, the fact that the operator has provided this information. The other request that, that the department would make is that under statute, there are considered temporary units and permanent units. So under the reading of the statute, the information that's been provided on this well, I think is enough that the department would recommend that we establish this well as a permanent unit for this sand, for this producing sand. Now, given its location in the field, it's not right in the center of the field, it's on the edge of the field, which also precludes the fact that it probably won't produce any more than what they're saying it's going to produce. If this well was in the center of the field, it's different. There might be more uncertainty about that. But this well, given its position and given the information we have about it, it seems very likely that this is all it's going to produce is what they're suggesting. So the department, in turn, for saying that this is a permanent unit, we would also request that the operator provide pressure data on a 3-month interval and production data that we ask for in order to monitor the decline of this well to see how valid these estimates are for the reserves and the drainage. I think this would be very helpful information both for the operator, any future operators that come here, and for the department to make a determination going forward on spacing in the Payette Basin. And that's all the information I have.
Thank you, Mr. Thumb. I have no additional questions, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Ms. Vega. Thank you, Mr. Thumb. Since you have no further questions of your witness, I open it up to the applicant. Mr. Christian, do you have any questions of Ms. Vega or the witness?
I wouldn't have any of Ms. Vega, but give me 1 second here. No, sir, I don't believe I have any questions for him.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Piotrowski, do you have any questions of Mr. Thumb?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Go ahead. Please proceed.
Mr. Thumb, I'm going to ask you to turn to, let me ask you some preliminary questions first. So do I understand properly that your job is to review and hopefully far better than I do understand the technical data contained with an application and then existing Idaho law in evaluating that application? Is that your job?
That's correct. That's part of my job, yes.
Okay, and that's what you did in this case, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, I'm going to go slowly here. I'm getting warnings that my internet connection here is unstable, so it tends to do that and then even out. Can I ask you to look at, please, slide 7? So IDL page 7. Okay, so I notice on first of all, let me start the Isopac contour drawings on this illustration. Do those represent do you know if those represent the depth of the sand or the depth only of the portion that the Fallon 110 well can produce?
these contours don't represent any depth. They represent a zone within that well that is indicated as possibly productive. And these contours indicate that area in which the Fallon well can effectively produce within that sand. So this map was constructed. One of the things that Dr. Allen did not point out is that what they did is take the sand map and the structure map, and they basically subtract those and then put the hydrocarbons on the bottom, and this is how they get the map. So what I tried to depict in my cross section was that very thing.
Okay, so let's go ahead and turn, actually before, so there's a red line that is labeled A to A prime, a dashed red line. Is that the point at which you drew the cross section?
That's correct, and that's an approximation.
Okay. Now, in terms of applying this data to, or rather applying existing Idaho law to the data and evaluating the application, spacing units, according to the statute, are designed to reflect the entire pool of hydrocarbons, not the pre-existing wells. Isn't that true?
Not sure what you're asking. Can you ask that again?
Well, this image we're looking at, for instance, of the net pay Isopac is based on what can be efficiently and economically produced from the Fallon 110 well. But there's nothing in the statute that requires that spacing units be based on what can be efficiently produced from a particular well. Is there?
And Mr. Hearing Officer, if I could, I'm going to object just to the extent that Mr. Thumb is not an attorney. He's a technical expert of the department. However, to the extent that you understand the question and you're able to answer it based on your knowledge and experience applying Idaho law to spacing applications, please go ahead.
Did you understand my question?
Yes, so as was described this morning, and as I asked for in some of my follow-up questions, this reservoir has only been encountered by one well in the entire basin, and that's the Fallon 110. So in effect, this is the only information that we have on this pool, this and what was presented this morning. So this is a valid map and valid technical information for what can be produced from the well.
What can be produced from that particular well, right?
Correct.
And let me interject. Excuse me, Mr. Piotrowski. And again, I was just muted. I sustain your objection, Ms. Vega. Mr. Thumb is not here in a legal capacity to interpret statute. So I want to say that. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Piotrowski.
Mr. Thomas, could I move to strike all of his testimony in which Mr. Thumb said that he thought the application was appropriate under Idaho law? Because you have ruled he's not qualified to make that statement.
I will tell you this. Let's take just about maybe a 3 or 4 minute recess while I consult with my counsel on how to address that. Mr. Piotrowski, do you mind?
Oh, no problem.
Thank you.
No, I'm not. I'm just trying not to mess up my connection.
Okay, folks, thank you for that.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Thomas, but can I respond to Mr. Piotrowski's motion to strike this testimony after we make sure everybody's on the line?
Ms. Vega, if you don't mind, I would like to say something first, and then if you'd like to respond, you can follow up with that. Is that fair enough?
Sure, however you'd like to
Okay,
take the argument, yeah.
thank you. I think we've got everyone back on. Thank you for that brief recess. I spoke with counsel, and as the hearing officer, Mr. Piotrowski and parties, as the hearing officer, I'm the one who will determine the decision about law, and I'll give the testimony the appropriate weight under the law. I do hear your motion to strike, and I will not strike it at this time. To the extent there is a legal decision to be made here, that is within my discretion, and that decision will be reflected in my order. So that said, Ms. Vega, you're welcome to provide additional comment.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I would just point out that pursuant to Idaho Code 47-318, subsection 1, it is the department's statutory duty to promptly establish spacing units for each pool, which necessarily requires employees of the department to understand the legal confines within which spacing units can be established within Idaho. So there is some intersection between understanding and applying the law. However, as my objection was stated, Mr. Thumb isn't an attorney and he's not a legal expert. So I think it maybe is just a matter of semantics on how the questions are being asked. So that's all I would say.
Thank you, Ms. Vega. Thank you, Mr. Piotrowski. I appreciate your patience in that. Please proceed.
Not clear that I understand what questions I'm allowed to ask and what questions I am not. Is Mr. Thumb going to provide legal opinions or not?
I would say, and again, I'm not certain what Mr. Thumb will say. I want to go back and say, you can ask the questions that you feel appropriate, and Mr. Thumb can answer the questions appropriately. And when I draft the order, I will listen and consider everything both of you have said and give the appropriate weight at that time.
This certainly feels like you're applying a double standard, but I'll do the best I can under the circumstances. So, Mr. Thumb, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Mr. Thumb, to your knowledge, at any point in Idaho's statute, is the appropriateness of a spacing unit dependent on the precise location of an existing well?
Yes, it must be within the confines of the proposed unit.
Okay. And in fact, the proposed unit, isn't it true, is required to be based on, and I'll quote the statute here, 47-318 sub 2, result in the efficient and economical development of the pool as a whole. That's the statutory language, right?
Okay.
And so the Isopac maps that we're looking at, do those describe the pool as a whole, or do those only describe the pool that the operators of Fallon 110 think that they can produce?
This is the information for what that well can produce within the pool. They did provide information showing the extent of the pool and the location of that well in the pool. So in my opinion, this was an appropriate depiction of what that well can produce.
Okay, fair enough. That's what this well can produce, but it may not be the entire pool. Well, it is not the entire pool that this well can produce. That was a terrible question. Let me try again. This well cannot produce from the entire pool, can it?
And that's common in a field situation. A pool can cover thousands and thousands of acres, but a well can only efficiently drain a small portion of that thousands and thousands of acres. So in this case, that well is appropriate.
Okay, so that well will drain part of the pool, but the pool itself is bigger than what the well can drain.
Quite possibly.
Is that right?
Yes. Quite possibly.
If we could please take a look at slide 8. Now, as I understand it, this is actually, I will say, this is a really impressive attempt to create in 2 dimensions what is very clearly a 3-dimensional structure. So I want to make sure I understand it. The line that runs diagonally, roughly from the top left to the lower right, a dark colored line, I guess it's black. That is that the line of your, oh, I'm sorry, no, that's the bore, the well bore, correct?
That would be an approximation of the well bore as it intercepts the B sand, yes.
Okay. And we are looking at the B sand essentially from the side along that A to A prime line that you designated on the Isopac map, right?
Approximately, yes.
Okay. And the portion and the line, the portion of the dotted line that indicates current gas water contact, that is where the data we have so far indicates that gas water interface, right?
That's correct.
And then when where we see the label top of pay zone interval, that's the highest point, and I mean highest as in elevation, that this particular well will be able to produce hydrocarbons from this pool, right?
Potentially, yes.
Meaning potentially they could go higher, or potentially they might not quite reach that high.
Well, as I noted, the hatchered area is the current perforated interval. If the operator only produces from that perforated interval, they're only going to produce up to the top of those perforations, not all the way to the top of the sand. Only in the case where they can move the perforations higher in the sand will they capture the hydrocarbons higher in that zone. The geometry of the interception point makes it impossible to go any higher than that.
Okay. How common is it to move the perforation points over the life of a well's production?
It's fairly common. It happens a lot, especially in conventional reservoirs.
Okay. Now, as we continue to look at this, we see that the sand B extends above the line that's marked as top of the pay zone interval. And if I understand the geometry of how you set this up, that's the portion of the sand B that on an overhead map would extend to the southeast. Is that correct?
Approximately, yes.
Okay. And so whatever hydrocarbons might be in that area that's within sand B, but above the top of the pay zone interval, that's still part of the pool in this case, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, but this well won't be able to. I'm sorry, I find myself making assumptions that I shouldn't, because I am no geologist, I am no scientist. As I understand it, if this is a water drive reservoir, which it appears to be, is that correct? It appears to be a water drive reservoir?
It does at this point.
Okay. And if it is a water drive, then that basically means the water will push the gas up. And that's the mechanism that allows recovery of that gas. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there ever a circumstance in which the hydrocarbons will go farther down, thus increasing the extent to which the perforations at any one particular level can extract them?
In a conventional reservoir, no. And this is a conventional reservoir. That's highly unlikely, and it's something I've never experienced in 35 years.
Okay. So that portion of sand B, which lies above the line marked as top of pay zone interval, do you know whether, if we converted that back to the overhead map, the more traditional mapping view that we're all familiar with, do you know where that sand B would extend to?
We have no information on that. I don't have access to the seismic information that the operator has. Again, this is just a cartoon depiction of the information that they provided us, and I use it for demonstration purposes only. The extent and the amount of sand or reservoir that goes above the pay zone interval, I don't have that information for.
Okay. Do we know that there is in fact some portion that's above the pay zone interval?
Potentially, yes, there could be.
Okay. So are you saying we don't really know what the size of the pool is here?
We know approximately in this area, and based on Mr. Allen's interpretation of the seismic data and where he feels the sand is, we do have a close approximation. And I know that based on his experience, he is very well versed at making those kind of estimates. So I have some level of confidence in his ability to make that assessment.
If we had all the same data that we have today, if our data was constant, but there was not an existing well, is the Fallon 110 well the most efficient way to extract the hydrocarbons in this particular pool? Or could we do better?
That's pure speculation. I can't assess that.
Okay. It's true, isn't it, that there is nothing, and there's no reason that you're required to evaluate this as a rectangular rather than a round spacing unit, is there?
I think the statute does state that units shall follow government section lines. So we do have some restrictions within the statute that says how a unit must be defined. And this is done in order to keep a regular pattern of development in reservoirs that extend for large areas. And so what this does is it makes the development orderly, not haphazard. And that's why it's described that way.
In this particular case, isn't it true that the probable pool is less than 640 acres in total size?
I would say that's a fair assessment, yes.
Okay. And in fact, the statute gives the department the opportunity to establish spacing units of, quote, different sizes or shapes. Isn't that true?
Within the confines of government sections and the government descriptions of sections, yes.
Okay. And isn't it also true that the spacing unit is required to be established so that no more than one well will be drilled in that unit, right?
Correct.
Okay. So if
Let me clarify that. The statute states that one well within the unit in a common source of supply.
I'm sorry, Mr. Piotrowski. Mr. Thumb, could you please identify what statute it is that you are actually reading into the record?
Okay, let me look here.
I apologize, I was assuming that you were reading something into the record, so I just wanted to make sure we had that legal authority in there, so.
47.318.4. An order establishing spacing units shall direct that no more than one well shall be drilled to and produced from the common source of supply on any unit.
Okay. And that read together with section 2, well, do you understand that to indicate that the purpose of a spacing unit is to define a unit which can, and define a well location that can most efficiently produce that unit on that pool or in that pool?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Fair enough. The point of the law here, as I understand it, is to avoid drilling more wells than we have to fully develop the resource. Do you understand it the same way?
Yes.
Okay. The Fallon 110 well is not going to fully develop the resource, is it?
It's based on information that existed. We have to take the data that we acquired from this well and go forward, and that's what the operator's done. Prior to that, we didn't have this information. We had a best guess.
Right.
So you have to make an assessment on that.
The job today in addressing a spacing unit application is to set a spacing unit that's most efficient, right? And it's most efficient as to the pool.
And for this well, yes.
Where in the statute does it say for this well? Does it?
Mr. Thomas, I would object to this on a couple of bases. I feel as though Mr. Piotrowski is being argumentative. Again, Mr. Thum is not a legal expert. If Mr. Piotrowski wants to read into the record the statutory language, I think that perhaps is the most appropriate way to get to the point that he's trying to make.
Thank you, Ms. Vega. Stand by just a moment. I do, as I've listened to this, I can say that it's one thing for Mr. Thum, as you stated earlier, to have an understanding of statute, because in determining the viability of a spacing application, he has to have that understanding. But at the same time, he's not in a place or trained to make a legal conclusion. And it could be interpreted that Mr. Piotrowski is asking Mr. Thum to make a legal conclusion right now. I'm not certain if Mr. Piotrowski is, and so I'll give that to him and ask him to clarify if that is his intent or not.
I don't even remember what question I asked last, to be honest.
So
how about if I withdraw it and ask a different one?
I appreciate that, Mr. Piotrowski, and for everyone, go ahead.
Sir, I think you've already answered this, but I want to make sure I got it in the record. The map we are currently looking at, which describes the, I'm going to get this language wrong yet again, the Isopac, is that the right word? Yes, the net pay Isopac map, which in turn is then used to define a roughly square spacing unit. That map is based solely on what can be produced from the Fallon 110 well. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. It is not based on the known contours based on the evidence available today of the pool as a whole, is it?
No, and pools are commonly developed with more than one well.
Okay, but not in not in the same spacing unit though, right?
Correct.
Okay. In this case, is it not in fact true that the Fallon 110 will not produce all of the available producible gas in the Sand B pool?
And there's nothing unusual about that.
But it's true that it will not produce all that's available.
And typically, one well will not produce all the hydrocarbons available in a pool.
It will not produce all of the hydrocarbons lying under this spacing unit, will it?
Under the proposed spacing unit?
Correct. It will leave some gas behind above the highest perforation level of the bore, right?
Yeah, that's probably correct.
One last question, and this is really just for me. You made reference, and as I think you know, I'm still learning my way around in this field. You made reference to the difference between a resource and a conventional play. Just to educate me and all the other non-oil and gas people watching, would you explain what that difference is and if it matters in this case?
A conventional play is a play in which hydrocarbons are generated in a source rock, and then they migrate to what's called a reservoir rock. The sandstones in the Payette Basin are reservoir rocks, so they contain the hydrocarbons, but they didn't generate the hydrocarbons. A resource play, which you hear about in Texas and Oklahoma and Wyoming and North Dakota, that is a play that is designed to extract the hydrocarbons directly from the rocks that generate those hydrocarbons. Those rocks have much, much different characteristics than what is found here. So they're termed resource plays because it's the resource or the source of the hydrocarbons. In this case, this is more of a conventional reservoir play. So it's typical of what's found in the Gulf of Mexico offshore, a lot of other older plays that didn't exist, that existed 20 years ago prior to the resource plays. So those reservoirs have different performance characteristics than the resource plays, and they must be treated differently.
And just so it's clear, this is a conventional play, and that's what we've been dealing with across southwest Idaho?
That's correct. We do not have a resource play in southwest Idaho. There's been none identified to this point in time.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Mr. Thumb. Thank you, Ms. Vega. Ms. Bonnie, do you have any questions at this time?
I do not, sir.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Vega, would you like to redirect?
Yes, thank you. I have just a few questions. Mr. Thumb, is there a difference between a reservoir and a pool? Both terms have been used today.
I have to look at the definitions because I don't think they're exactly clear in statute. A reservoir can be the entire geologic unit or interval that produces. A pool is defined as one accumulation. But again, as I said, a pool is not restricted to one well development. If a pool is large enough, because of the dynamics of production, one well cannot efficiently drain it. It takes more than one well to drain a pool.
Based on your training and experience, is it possible that there can be various zones within the structure of a pool?
Yes.
Based on the information that is available to you regarding the Fallon 110 and the Sand B, are you able to tell if there are different zones of the Sand B pool?
At this point, no. This, again, as I stated before, there's only one well that's ever even encountered this sand. So we have to base our estimates on this one well.
As the well is produced, will there be additional information available about the pool?
Yes, there will.
Will that additional information perhaps provide some new information about whether or not there may be additional zones of the pool within Sand B?
Possibly. Most of the information that we will get will give us more detailed information about how this well can produce.
And based on your time with the department and your experience with the oil and gas division, are you aware of whether or not a spacing unit is able to be established for different zones of a pool?
From what I've read in the statute, yes, I believe that's correct.
Based on your review of the information currently available, does the proposed spacing unit for the B sand cover the lands that are believed to be underlaid by the pool?
The unit covers the part of the pool that can effectively be drained by the Fallon well.
Based on your training and experience in the industry, I understand, as I believe you previously testified, that it's common that, and perhaps expected, that not every single molecule of hydrocarbons is produced by a well from a pool.
That's correct, and that's quite common.
However, is it your understanding that the fact of leaving hydrocarbons in the ground and not producing them is not considered waste of that hydrocarbon resource?
That's correct, because there are what are known as secondary and tertiary recovery methods that don't apply here, that if the economics are there, someone can come back and try and recover those. But this is very common, and when it's taken into account, when an operator drills a well, as to what they can recover from the reservoir. But this is very, very common in all types of plays.
And it's my understanding that the reservoir or the pool that we're talking about is primarily gas, correct?
That's correct.
And would you, based on your training and experience, do you consider, or do you have knowledge about waste of a gas resource to primarily capture things like escape of the gas into the air, the blowing or releasing of the gas into the surrounding atmosphere, as opposed to leaving it in the ground?
You're talking about facilities instead of underground waste?
I'm sorry, you broke up just a little bit there. What was your question?
No, are you talking about waste in terms of facilities like leaking?
Perhaps. I mean, leaking would result in the loss of the gas into the air or surrounding atmosphere, correct?
Yes, I suppose. I'm not.
That's okay. I believe, let me just double check my notes here. That's all the additional questions that I have at this time, Mr. Thomas. Thank you. And Mr. Thumb, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vega. I do not have any additional questions of the witness. Do you have any other witnesses you'd like to call at this time?
No.
Okay, thank you. It's currently 2:01 Mountain Time right now. Next will be, we'll start with the testimony of the objectors, but before that, would everyone mind taking a maybe 6-minute break? And let's just say we come back here just before 2:10. We'll start it back up.
Mr. Thomas, I have a question.
Go ahead.
My understanding is that the objectors did not disclose any witnesses or exhibits. So it's unclear to me what's left at this stage before this evening.
I appreciate that, Mr. Christian. Let's go ahead and thank you for that, by the way. Let's go ahead and take a break, and I'll move that over, and I'll come back in just a few minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, you can go ahead and pause recording. Thanks. And I think we're waiting on Mr. Oh, here he is. Okay. Great. Awesome. Folks, everybody, thanks for that break. I appreciate it. Before we cut off, the applicant asked a question about the objector, and I can say, address this to Mr. Piotrowski. Your witness disclosure stated that you would only use the witnesses from the department and the operator. Earlier, we agreed that Mr. Allen had been dismissed, and you just cross-examined Mr. Thumb. I guess I'm asking, are you finished at this time?
We have no further evidence to present.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Piotrowski. And I would go ahead and move on to Miss Bonnie. I don't believe you have any evidence or witnesses that you submitted that I want to open the floor to you. Do you? I just haven't, I'm not that familiar with the record right now. You may have submitted something at the end. Do you have anything to add?
No, I did not submit anything, and I don't plan on calling any witnesses or presenting any evidence.
Thank you, Miss Bonnie. I may not have handled that as appropriately legally as I should have, but I'm glad you helped me out there. Thank you. You know, with that, let me go over my notes real quick to make sure I'm checking all the boxes on my end. Yeah, I think we are finished with all witnesses at this point and all exhibits. So I would say if on the first day, the parties would like to provide closing arguments before tonight's public witness testimony, we're welcome to do so. I would start with the applicant, Snake River Oil and Gas, to make a closing argument.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Briefly, Mr. Allen and I think Mr. Thumb combined with him provided what I would consider to be unrebutted evidence regarding the likely drainage area of the Fallon 110 well and its appropriate placement within the requested spacing unit area. As I understand Mr. Piotrowski's arguments and his questions of the witnesses, he has two main arguments. One is, and I'll suggest that they are mutually inconsistent and internally contradictory. On the one hand, he suggests, I think, that the spacing unit needs to be scribed around the perimeter of the drainage area with some exactitude. But of course, we know that the law doesn't require that. In fact, it requires spacing by geographic subdivision, because one of the considerations that's undertaken in spacing is the orderly development of the pool as a whole. And as Mr. Thumb testified, rare is the occasion when one well drains the entire pool. And as Mr. Thumb and Mr. Allen both testified, spacing according to geographic subdivision in square or rectangular shapes is the ordinary method of spacing in virtually every producing area. So what's been requested is not unusual. With respect to, and what I'll say is, you know, the reason for that is the statute is a balancing of interest. It always has been. It's a balancing of interest between maximizing and efficient production and enabling the administration of production by operators so that it can occur. Upsetting that balance in one direction or the other too far it will effectively result in either the rule of capture or in no drilling ever taking place, no production ever taking place. To put it in blunt terms, the statute is a recognition of the principle that perfect is the enemy of good. There is nothing in the statute that requires the unit to be described exactly around the drainage area. And in fact, most people acknowledge that that's effectively impossible. We're talking about opinions based on interpretation of seismic and other data about conditions that exist a mile underground. We do the best we can, and that's what the law requires. The other argument that I think the objectors make, which again internally contradicts the first argument, is that we should apparently not space or produce the pool until we can discover and place the hypothetical best well to produce the entire pool. Again, not what the law requires, and it ignores surface impediments. The Fallon well is a perfect example of the fact that surface impediments exist. It's drilled directionally and had a several hundred foot kick to it to get to its target because there was not a place available directly above it to drill vertically. There's a river that goes through the area. There's a dense population in the area. There are a number of reasons why operators regularly don't drill in the most theoretically ideal location or drill to the most theoretically ideal point of extraction because they can't. The real world gets in the way. And the objector's argument completely ignores that side of the equation, while the statute, I would submit to you, recognizes it because it says in 318 sub 2, it refers to circumstances, geologic or otherwise, affecting the orderly development of a pool. That language gives the department an enormous amount of flexibility in reaching its opinion about what is the most appropriate spacing. The suggestion that the statute is rigid and requires only that spacing which will, in a theoretical perfect world in a vacuum result in the complete drainage of a pool, that language is a reflection that the absolutist view is not the law. So I would submit to you that the applicant has put on more than sufficient evidence to reach the conclusion that this is an appropriate spacing area around the likely drainage area of this well. The objectors, while they had an opportunity to put on evidence to support the argument they made, even though I think it's wrong, they've provided no evidence, and there is no evidence in the record that there is in fact another well which would be both placeable and could reach the deposit, reach the B sand in a more effective manner, and could more efficiently develop the resource. Whether other wells may be drilled in the future and other spacing units is another question, but there's been zero evidence presented by the objectors to even support the argument they're making. So I think the applicants presented plenty of evidence to support its request. I believe the department agrees with it, and the application should be granted.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. Closing arguments next. Mr. Piotrowski.
Thank you. The statute here is actually pretty clear. It's just not clear the way that Mr. Christian thinks it is and that his client would like it. The statutory command from the Idaho legislature, in other words, statutory command that we may not ignore, is quite clear. Reading Idaho Code 47.318, it is quite apparent what the legislature's intent was. And we determined that intent by what they actually wrote. And so if we go through this statute, we can see a total system in which the legislature sought to do exactly what Mr. Christian suggests, balance various interests, but not overbalance the interests of somebody who happens to run out and buy a well, which is what Snake River Oil and Gas wants to do here. They want you to set a spacing unit that will be most efficient and economic for Snake River Oil and Gas, and everybody else's interests be damned. So let's take a look at what the statute actually requires. In 47.318.1, the department is commanded to establish spacing units for each pool. The focus here is on the pool, which is a defined term, and a pool is a body of hydrocarbons. So the first command is set up spacing units, set them up for every pool of hydrocarbons that you have identified. Subsection 2 gives you the primary command of how those spacing units should be sized. An order establishing spacing units shall specify the size, shape, and location of the units, which shall, not may, but shall be such as will, in the opinion of the department, result in the efficient and economic development, and here's the critical part, of the pool as a whole. The evidence you've been presented today, Mr. Thomas, only tells you how you can efficiently and economically utilize the Fallon 110 well that Snake River Oil and Gas happens to own. It doesn't tell you anything, none of the evidence tells you anything about how efficiently and economically develop the pool as a whole. And yet, that is your command, to direct the development of the entire pool. Furthermore, Section 2 also provides that the spacing unit to be entered shall be described in accordance with the public land survey system. Doesn't say you have to use a section, doesn't say it has to be square or rectangular. It says describe it by reference to the public land survey system. That's exactly what happens on the piece of property I happen to have my house on. It's described by reference to the public land survey system. That does not mean that it's a square. In fact, it's not square. That simply describes how the spacing unit shall be described. It is not a requirement that the spacing unit be rectangular or square or any other shape. We'll come back to that point. In 47.318.3, the command is given to you, Mr. Thomas, to establish spacing units or approve spacing units of approximately uniform size and shape, and here's the important part again, for the entire pool. Not for part of the pool, not for the part of the pool that Snake River Oil and Gas has drilled to, not for the part of the pool that's easy to develop. You will set spacing units to be approximately uniform across the entire pool. And yet what's proposed here as a spacing unit would put some large percentage of the pool within the spacing unit and leave some smaller percentage of it outside the spacing unit, meaning you're going to have at least 2 spacing units overlapping this pool, and they will not be of approximately uniform size and shape as they are required to be by statute. Furthermore, still in subsection 3 of the statute, the department is permitted, specifically permitted, to establish spacing units of different sizes or shapes. So on the one hand, Mr. Christian, Mr. Allen, even it appears Mr. Thumb, want all of the spacing units to be square, but they don't necessarily want them to be of different size, but they want them to be of different sizes. So they're willing to use different sizes, but they're not willing to use different shapes. In fact, the one thing Mr. Christian was right about is that you have some discretion to describe a spacing unit that actually meets the statute, not necessary spacing Snake River Oil and Gas has asked for as a tool to maximize its profits. The next subsection of the statute specifies an order establishing spacing units shall direct that more than one UL shall be drilled to produce from the common source. So to the extent that there is going to need to be more than one well in order to efficiently and economically recover the hydrocarbons under the spacing unit, it doesn't necessarily have to be the Fallon 110 well. There is nothing, I think I can literally say nothing in the statute that suggests, Mr. Thomas, that you should give any consideration at all to a well that already exists, to a well that was drilled by somebody, on their own volition. That well doesn't define the spacing unit. The geology defines the spacing unit. That's the command of the legislature. Finally, in subsection 5, the legislature commands, with the word again, shall, demands that spacing units shall cover all lands determined or believed to be underlaid by such pool. And the application you've received does not do that. As both of the witnesses admitted, there are lands within the pool, or there are lands overlaying the pool that are not included in the spacing unit. Mr. Allen thought it was a very small piece of land, but nonetheless, he admitted there was some portion of what his best guess on where the pool is, not where the pool is, but what part of the pool he could drain, that underlies land outside the spacing unit on the eastern boundary of the proposed spacing unit. Mr. Thumb explained that his analysis of the information, his analysis of the best data we have, making the best estimates he can right now, is that the pool extends farther to the southeast than the Isopac drain area that Snake River Oil and Gas wants you to call a spacing unit. The bottom line here is pretty simple. The spacing unit process is not designed to serve the needs of Snake River Oil and Gas. The spacing unit process is designed to serve the goal, the express goal of the Idaho legislature to maximize the development of oil and gas, to do so efficiently and economically, and to protect the correlative rights of everybody affected thereby. And the proposed spacing unit doesn't do that. We ask that you deny the application with instructions or some indication that a spacing application that encompasses the whole pool might be approved in this case. But the application as it stands today should be denied.
Thank you, Mr. Piotrowski. I appreciate that. I would go ahead. I want to make sure here. Moving on to Ms. Bonnie. Would you like to make a closing argument?
No, thank you, Mr. Thomas.
All right, thank you. Ms. Vega, would you like to make a closing argument?
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. The purpose of this evidentiary hearing, as you know, is to determine whether or not the proposed unit is adequate. Is it too large? Is it too small? Is it adequate based on the information that's available? A pool is defined in the Idaho Code, section 47-310, subsection 25, as an underground reservoir containing a common accumulation of oil and gas. It goes on to say, each zone of a structure that is completely separated from any other zone in the same structure is a pool. This definition of pool does not say that one pool can only be drained by one well. Inefficiencies in the flow regimes within a pool, along with the size of a pool, may mean that more than one well could be necessary to efficiently and economically drain the recoverable hydrocarbons from a pool. This fact is further addressed in Idaho Code section 47-317-3b(i), which states that no gas well shall be drilled less than 990 feet from any other well drilling to and capable of producing gas from the same pool. The application before you deals with one well from the pool that has been identified based upon the data and information that currently exists. The information that's been presented as Mr. Thumb recommends on behalf of the department supports the adequate, efficient production from the pool. I suppose if the application is granted and the well is able to be produced, all sorts of other information may become available, including perhaps the need for an additional well, which is what Mr. Piotrowski seems to be advocating for. However, that is not before you today. Today, it's this well that has accessed this part of the pool and that the testimony overwhelmingly shows can be efficiently drained by this well. There is no other evidence in the record before you. There are no other interests that have testified. There are no other witnesses who have explained to you why this spacing unit is not appropriate or adequate. Instead, the evidence before you shows and supports the department's recommendation that the application be granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vega. At this point, I'd like to finalize or end it with Snake River Oil and Gas, the applicant. You may provide any rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I don't want to belabor the point, and I will let you and your able counsel interpret and apply the statute as it's written in its entirety and it's in its context with the entire Oil and Gas Act. Other than to say that Mr. Piotrowski's reading of 47.318 is cherry-picked, and he continues to leave out the language that provides for flexibility to the applicant and the department. Throughout that section of the statute, it refers to circumstances, geologic and otherwise. And that means any other circumstances which may bear on economic and efficient development. In fact, the fact that a well has been drilled and exists and is able to produce sand B right now is a circumstance which can be taken into account in determining what's appropriate spacing, because to require a completely different well to be drilled for $3 or $4 or $5 million in a different area and abandon the capital that's been invested here is not economic or efficient. In any case, as I said before, there has been no evidence presented that there is any other well that would be more appropriate for geologic or any other circumstances. The only evidence that's been presented is that it's appropriate to produce this well, and the spacing that's been suggested is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a few things I want to wrap up with. First, I will take this matter and the evidence and the testimony, this whole thing today under advisement and issue a written decision within 30 days of this hearing, which will be September 13th, end of day September 13th. I also want to follow up that tonight in Fruitland, we're going to have a public comment period at 6 o'clock. I've got plenty of time to get ready for that and get out there. I appreciate that. It's going to be open to everyone. This is going to be broadcast on Facebook Live as well, and it will be a Zoom meeting. I will have actually an Apple iPad there that folks could use to provide any testimony if they would like. If they show up in person, we will be adhering to any physical distancing requirements the city of Fruitland may have in that facility. And I look forward to that. Honestly, it'll be interesting. I think we've worked through all of our Zoom issues that we had earlier in the day, and this afternoon seems to go very well. The Zoom hearing that we've had is being uploaded now to the YouTube, Ideal's YouTube channel. I don't know when it'll be up there though. So with all of that said, my day's not quite over, but I want to thank everyone for being a part of this today. And with that, I adjourn this hearing. It's 2:33 Mountain Time. Thank you very much. Chris, you can go ahead and stop the recording, and then I think Robbie or Chris, whoever has the